Eliana. In the city of Oakland, New Orleans, there was a princess. The thing is, however, I wasn't just an ordinary princess. I was also a slave to my pack. You see, in every story there's a blissful beginning, but this isn't one of those stories. It's hard to even pinpoint exactly where mine begins. My life had been hell ever since I came out of my mother's womb, literally, because she died the night of the full moon that I was put to bed. News spread like wildfire of the child who had taken the life of her own mother. That child was me. Everyone had their version of the story. Some claimed that she died when I had come out, and others said that she died before. All that mattered to me was the fact that she died at all. I had to grow up being labeled as the murderer and monster who brought darkness into the entire pack. And for that, I was loathed by everyone, including my father, Gerald, who could never forgive me for taking the life of my mother, his Luna. He lost everything that night, and all he saw now, when he looked at me, was the striking resemblance I shared with her. Her bright blue eyes and that smile. He hated that I took after her so much, and in his grief he married another woman. Sienna was as evil as stepmothers come. She hated me just like she hated my mother. But at least she bore 2 other kids for my dad. For most of my life, I spent it in a dark dungeon when I wasn't tendering to the needs of everyone else, either washing the stack of plates or cleaning the entire castle from each post to corner, while enduring the insults and abuses from everyone. There she is. They usually gossiped and pointed without any regard, most of them even going as far as dashing me a slap across the face or punching me in my belly. I had so many scars to attest to the maltreatment, but I had no other option as I had nowhere else to go. And being an Omega rogue would get me killed faster out there than in here. I lived my entire life alone, with my father's resentment growing so much over the past 20 years that he never desired to see me. To say that I hated my life would be an understatement, but I had no other choice. I retired down to the carpet spread across the cold floor, and for a moment, my eyes stared into the darkness. Today was one of the days it hurt even more. I was bleeding from the soles of my feet from standing all day, and I had served food until my hands grew numb, that they could fall off at any time now. But at least it was the end of yet another day. I closed my eyes, knowing tomorrow would not be any different. I wasn't far gone when suddenly, my door barged open and I arose, knowing what time it was. Eliana, my stepbrother. Jackson sang my name, and almost immediately, the stench of alcohol slapped me in the face. I folded myself into the corner of the room, quivering with dread. "Where are you?" he whistled. I saw his gleaming eyes far before I saw the rest of his body. Jackson had a chain in his hands, which he suddenly used to lash my back. I fell to the ground, groaning in pain, but I couldn't dare look up. Jackson was always like this each time he had something to drink. He would sneak down to the dungeon where he'd tie me up and hold my lips shut as he took advantage of me. Each time, it grew more and more aggressive and painful, but there was no end to this torture. He'd become far too demanding, like I was nothing but a chunk of flesh to him. My eyes welled up with tears as I felt his presence behind me. His hands groped through my inner thigh, and I could feel him breathing down my neck. My skin crawled with disgust, and my insides twisted into a knot. This was my dreadful life. The pungent stench of liquor oozed from his lips as he battled to unbuckle his belt. He let the bottle down, which he'd only realize later was his biggest mistake. I groaned in pain as he took me by my bleeding feet. My whole body ached with the most brittle bones, but Jackson was merciless. It felt like today was the day I would finally die in his arms, and a bolt of panic flashed across my face. He turned me over as I watched his pants fall to the ground with a thud, revealing the hard rod of flesh between his legs. When Jackson leaned forward, I wedged against him. "Stop," I struggled from beneath. nowhere near the weight of his entire body which pressed into me. He began to move, but I wasn't about to give up. "Do you want me to get the ropes?" He darted me a glare, cold as ice, and a shiver went up my spine. "Fuck off." I spat into his face, and Jackson restrained my hands in a second. His grip was so tight that I could hear my bones cackle. He let out an exasperated grunt before standing up. At the corner of the dungeon was where he kept the ropes, so when he turned his back, I didn't even know what suddenly came upon me, but I couldn't do this. Not tonight, not when I was in so much pain. And so I grasped the bottle of vodka in my hands, slamming it into the side of his head. The glass shattered into a million pieces, and my eyes dazed from the blood that soaked my palms. I trembled as Jackson turned to me, a shard of the glass bottle sticking out of his head. "What did you do?" His eyes pumped with rage as I took a step back. "Don't take a step closer." I whimpered beneath my breath, and a cackle escaped his lips. "Or what?" he asked, ripping the glass tip from his skin. I should have known better than to attack him. Jackson was one of the strongest wolves in our pack. He wasn't an omega like I was. In fact, he was directly linked to becoming the alpha of bloodhounds one day. I cringed at the thought of that day ever happening, and I knew in that moment that I would rather be dead. "You'd scream?" Jackson quizzed, inching closer to where I was until my back was pressed against the wall. I was defenseless as my eyes began to shimmer in tears. No one knew about this or about Jackson's malevolent behaviors. He was nothing but an angel in everyone's eyes. They would have never even believed me if I had come forward to tell them everything Jackson had been doing to me. He'd made it clear that it was his word against mine. If anything, I would even bring more hatred on top of my head for trying to incriminate the next alpha. But I'd done way worse stabbing him in the head. His blood was on my hands, so no, I couldn't scream unless I wanted to never beat the murderer allegations. "Please, Jackson." I only started to beg as he came to a halt, barely meters from my face. "Please, you don't have to do this." His face was distorted with anger and bloodlust filled his eyes. "You're going to have to make it up to me when I bend you over." He grasped my waist and I screamed. "Shut up." Jackson landed a slap across my face, digging his nails into my neck as he shoved me into the wall. My back broke as I fell to the floor, coughing up blood, but he didn't care. Rather, he growled out of more anger, kicking me mercilessly in my stomach. My life flashed before my eyes. I might as well have died. I said, "Shut up. If you don't want to end up like your useless mother." He sparked in an outrage, and there was a piercing sound that rang through my ears. I couldn't die by Jackson's hands. If my fate was to end up dead now, I might as well run away. Being rogue didn't seem so bad. Garnering my last strength, I drew up a deep breath through my nose, and when he leaned in again, I managed to get a kick right through his shin. Jackson's knees knocked him over and he wedged himself against the wall. In the flash of a second, I got up from the floor. "You fucking bastard," he cussed beneath his breath as I gathered a few of my things to leave. "If I get you, it's over, you slut." I staggered my way towards the door, not in any way better shape than he was. I'd broken a rib and my feet, mouth, and arms were bleeding. But I had just one option, and that was to make it out of the door. Otherwise, I'd be dead meat in here. I heard him clamoring from behind. "I would kill you." I could scent his wolf crawling to the surface. It wasn't good for both of us. He knew. I dragged my feet tirelessly through the door, but the gates were still meters away. Jackson threw himself from one wall to another. "Fuck off, Jackson." I kept glancing over my shoulders to measure how close he was, and with each second he was drawing closer. I shut my eyes in agony. I couldn't move any more faster. "Come on, Eliana. Come on," I muttered beneath my breath as the gates came into sight. Up until that moment, I didn't realize what I was truly doing. I was leaving the pack for good. As soon as I crossed that gate, I knew there was no coming back. "I swear to God," Jackson cussed as I fell to the ground. My knees were growing weak and could no longer carry my body. He was close enough to grasp my ankles, but the injury to his head was slowly starting to take its toll. When he drew me underneath him, I dug my fingers into his eyes and around the pieces of glass still in them. Jackson groaned in excruciating agony, but I was able to buy myself some time. I pushed him off, staggering my way through the gates and forever locking it behind me. Only then did it truly dawn on me. "You," there was a vicious crack in Jason's voice. "You better never step foot back into this pack, or I will kill you," he gritted through his teeth as I finally stood up. My eyes met the full moon gleaming in the sky full of stars. The wind was cold, running through my gritty hair. I started to run, headed towards nowhere in particular, but I didn't stop running. All that mattered was what I was leaving behind me. After about an hour, I was sure I'd finally lost Jackson, and I fell to my knees in the center of a dark alley. Deep breaths escaped my lips as I threw my head over my shoulders. I couldn't believe I made it out. Maybe this was only the beginning of my story, I thought. But alas, I thought wrong. I had no idea that what was ahead of me was no better than what I left behind. Suddenly, from the corner of my eyes, I saw a shadow in the dark, and my heart skipped a beat. I sharply stood up. Who was that? Eliana. It was well into the dead of the night. Darkness circled me as I carried on along the streets of Oakland. My feet were bleeding and numb. My whole body ached. There was no stopping until I got out of here completely. Even as I was sure I'd lost Jackson, I still unconsciously threw my head over my shoulders. I was breathless from my lips, finally coming to a halt beneath a shady tree. Across from me was the bordering signs of Oakland and Tombsdale. I couldn't believe how far I'd gotten on foot, but I knew well enough then to cross over into that town. The wind coming from Tombsdale was cold and eerily quiet, driving a chill up my spine. I could hear the howling of hungry wolves from a distance, who I was sure couldn't wait to devour me. Unlike everyone else, my wolf was still yet to rise to the surface, so I didn't stand a chance of being rogue. Turning back around was an idea that flashed in my head, but alas, I continued further. I'd rather die in this cold forest than at the hands of Jackson. However, when my feet crossed in Tombsdale, I perceived a dark presence lurking suddenly around me. I'd heard a lot of his dark town, so many things that people had to say preceding a warning to never step foot in it. It was ruled mercilessly by one of the most ruthless alphas, Denver, who was also a sworn enemy of my father. I came to a sharp halt, seeing a shadow form right behind me. A bolt of panic impaled shock through my body, and there was a slight rumble in the skies. I could tell a wolf was close, but this was unlike anything I had ever scented. Was this it? Was this the end of my life? The first thing I noticed in the darkness was a pair of silver eyes glowing back at me, before a huge creature strutted from behind the trees. My heart lumped in the back of my throat as I faced him. Dark, long hair tied up in a bun. Sharp, sculpted features like his jaw. Rock-hard stones for muscles with a brooding shoulder. Alpha Denver was nothing short of what they described. His surmounting presence alone filled me with fear and dread. "What are you doing here, little one?" His voice was deep and decadent, slicing through me with an intense gaze, but I couldn't dare to speak. Behind him lunged forward an entire army of wolves growling with impatience to rip my body apart. Without much thought, I picked up my pace away from them. Maybe this was a terrible idea. Breathing heavily from my lips, I launched myself forward as I pushed harshly through the leaves. I didn't care that I was injured. I just kept running with the primal desire to survive. Was this my whole life now, always running from something? I threw myself in the opposite direction, but I wasn't so far off that I heard the alpha's voice thunder behind me. Bring her to me, he ordered his guard of betas. My heart was pounding heavily in my chest as I ran towards the nearest place of safety. Everywhere was pitch black ahead of me. The only time I could see somewhere was when the lightning struck, but with the lightning came the rain that immediately started to drench my entire body. I didn't stop running until I was forced to. My legs hooked behind a branch, and I fell with a thud to the ground. When I looked up, I saw him, but only for a split second before my world went dark. The next time I opened my eyes, I was in some place warmer with a candle burning at a distance from me. I jolted up from what seemed to be a bed, but I had no idea who it belonged to. I thought I was alone in the room until I heard the sound of his voice again. You thought you could run away from me? Denver's words were laced with a threatening tone as he crept forward into the light. His hands were tied behind him, and across his lips was a dark grimace. His mere presence filled me with so much anxiety that I backed myself into the corner. Clutching my knees to my chest, I cowered my gaze. As much I'd heard those stories about Tombsdale, I had heard even worse about their alpha. A bloodthirsty, war-seeking alpha that he was, leading an army of the most dangerous troopers. Denver killed anyone that got in his way without wasting a second, but he was quite patient with me. I'm not going to hurt you, he whispered. But I jerked backward when his arms stretched out. I can read through your mind. You're scared. You also have nowhere else to go, he said. I pushed a hard lump down my throat as he groped my sore ankles. His hands were just as callous, yet they were warm. I could feel him inside my chest, a glow rooting from the chambers of my heart. My skin sizzled where he touched, and there was a chill that went up my spine. What was this overwhelming feeling each time I looked into his eyes? It was as though my heart was no longer pounding and was suddenly at peace. Like I trusted him, or I was supposed to, even though I didn't want to. Like he was my mate. No. I shook my head off these repulsive thoughts. Denver was as monstrous as they came. I sharply pulled my legs away from him, and a deep scoff escaped his lips. I could have hurt you by now if I wanted to. You know he drew away to the single table in the entire room, only to pour himself a glass of wine. My mind tumultuously flashed back to Jackson as he took a sip of it. You're badly injured. It's why you passed out in the forest. Your entire body is also pumping with as much wolfsbane that I wonder how you're still alive, Denver added, darting me a glare as cold as ice. Ah, the wolfsbane that Jackson had been poisoning me with each night over the last 7 years. Sometimes I even think it was the reason I never came fully into my wolf. She'd been subdued and starved down my entire life. I was weak, harmless, and the pain ravaging my body was even more severe now. He abandoned his drink, walking back to my bedside. Denver's hands swept through my hair and then across my face. What happened? His gaze thoroughly assessed me like I was nothing more than a thin sheet of paper to him. Let me go, I finally brought myself to say when I finally gathered the courage. But my voice was barely even a faint whisper. A thank you would suffice, Denver scoffed. I'm not this very lenient with trespassers, his eyes darkened. I know you're a bloodhound. More so I know you're Gerald's daughter. You can't really hide anything from me, can you? Denver gritted through his teeth. However, what I don't know is what you were doing in the forest at that time of the night. Severely wounded and on the cusp of breathing your last. Could I tell him the truth? Could I actually trust him? Maybe Denver could save me from my stepbrother's wrath? Speak up now, little one. He commanded a tone that sent shivers up my spine, and I was so much afraid that I couldn't lie. Denver's eyes were harrowing and haunting. He was so powerful that no one dared to ever say no to him. The ones that did were rotting 6 feet below by now. I was lost. I wanted to tell him the truth, but for some reason, a lie came out. Don't lie to me, Denver sparked with outrage. I know when you're telling the truth, little one, he warned, running thin on patience. I ran away, I sharply blurted out. I ran away from my family. I no longer belong to them, I added. And my eyes shimmered with tears. His hands slowly drew across my wounded skin with tender. Did they do this? You? He asked, and it was the most emotion I'd seen in his face. I nodded, my head slightly. Who? How could I tell him it was everyone? Doesn't matter. As long as I don't return there, I'm safe, I whispered. Eliana, my name suddenly escaped from his lips, and my whole body reverberated. You're Eliana, the girl whose mother died when she was born. I did say the news spread like wildfire, but I never expected it to reach Tombsdale. I never expected the Alpha to ever know who I was. I didn't kill my mother. I swear I suddenly trembled out of the fear that now that he knew who I was, my fate would be no different from what I had to endure back at Bloodhounds. But then Alpha Denver rested a hand across my shoulders. I know, he muttered. As soon as I lifted my eyes to him, our gazes locked. Please don't harm me, I pleaded, and a dull pain set behind my temples. But Denver reached to hold my little hands, and they were nowhere near the size of his. All of a sudden, my heart started to hammer against my ribcage, and my stomach started to flutter. I could feel the mate bond. It was something inexplicable and harrowing, that I wasn't sure how much longer I could turn away from the truth. It was the moment I knew Denver was my mate. It showed my wolf was not so far gone, but alas, I don't think he realized it himself. Some alphas would have spent their whole life looking for a mate, only to find one when they aren't looking anymore. But for someone like Denver, it was clear that he had no intention to belong to another. His eyes were void of any human emotions, and that showed his incapacity to love. So of course he didn't know. Although he was tender to me at that moment, I had to remind myself of the monster he still was. I won't harm you, he whispered in a hoarse voice. Rather, I'll save you. You don't have to return to your pack, little one. If you stay here, I'll be able to protect you from evil. My eyes widened at him. I could already tell there was a catch. But you will owe me, he whispered. What could I possibly have to give the Alpha? I asked. Soon enough, you'll find out. He withdrew his hands to walk out of the room. You just get better now. You're in safe hands. The door closed behind me, and the room was dark and empty. Was I truly in safe hands? Eliana. The ice-cold fluid splurged across my belly, numbing around the areas that the ultrasound touched. I could hear the whooshing noise echo in the quiet room. My eyes never left Dr. Gazelle's face. I knew I'd be able to tell, even before she parted her lips, whether or not I was pregnant. No amount of words could describe how tense the atmosphere was. I clenched my heart with my teeth. It was as though my whole existence led up to this moment. The final truth was whether or not I was pregnant for Denver. I guess this is what happens when you unfortunately fall for someone you know you should never have. Denver couldn't have been any more different from me. I was an Omega slave, and he was an Alpha king. I was also a bloodhound while he belonged to the Black Moon Pack, arch rivals since the beginning of time. We were doomed from the start. It never seemed to be a thought for him that we could ever be anything more. Whenever I looked into his eyes, it was quite clear that he'd only ever see me as his contract wife, not capable of love. But I had a feeling everything was going to change when he found out that I was pregnant. Immediately, I saw it in the doctor's eyes, and a heavy exhale left my lips. I turned to face the machine, but even though I was unable to make out a single part of the fetus, I could very much hear its heartbeat. Congratulations, Dr. Gazelle exclaimed, and my hands clutched my lips. Oh, it was a surreal moment, one that the last 2 years had led up to. I'm pregnant. There was a crack in my voice as I whispered, Yes, you are. She ran her hands through my hair, roping me in for a hug, and on her shoulders, I cried. I didn't know how much I wanted this until it happened. I can't wait to tell Denver, He'd lose his mind, I sharply withdrew, eyes bright with an idea. I knew how much he wanted this child, and was I delusional to think that it could finally change everything, that I could capture the cold and ruthless Alpha's heart, my husband. I have to go. I climbed down the bed, immediately scrapping for my bags. I couldn't wait another second to see him. I need to talk to you. I sent a text, grinning like an idiot. I felt a million things all at the same time, but most of all, I was truly happy. Little did I know that was the last time in a really long time that I'd feel such way. I arrived at the Pack Villa and sighting Denver's car parked in the driveway. I sucked in a deep breath before mounting the front porch. The air was warm, and that smile didn't leave my lips until I was faced with him. Denver was seated in the dark, like he had already been waiting for me. "Oh," I exclaimed. "I didn't know you'd be here so fast." "Well, I have something to tell you, but only after I make you your favorite meal." I was on the cusp of hanging my coat when Denver arose. "Eliana," there was something quite harrowing about the way he called my name that caused my heart to drop into my stomach. I turned back to him, and there was barely any emotion in his eyes. "Have you already had something to eat?" I asked softly. "No, yes." He pushed a hard lump down his throat. "I got your text, and I have something to tell you too," Denver added. My brows immediately arched. Did he already know before I was able to tell him? No, it couldn't be that. There was something off about him that I couldn't quite decipher. Damned be the one that ever assumed to know who the Alpha truly was. But at least for the past 2 years, I'd been married to him. I'd unconsciously picked up each of his mood changes and what they meant, and I knew well enough that this wasn't about something good. Oh, this time, my voice was low and almost inaudible. "What is that?" "It's about us." Denver broke the news. "I'm afraid I can't keep this up for much longer. This isn't working, Eliana." He croaked, and it felt like a knife had stabbed into my chest. I almost fell backward, but I had to hold myself still. Time and everything else was frozen. But there was a loud noise that rang through my ears so much that I could barely hear myself. "It's been 2 years and the contract is nearly over. Still, you've been unable to provide with a child." "But," I echoed. No words came out. Just the endless tears from my eyes as I watched him dump a stack of papers to the table. I inched closer to make sure that this was real, that it was truly happening. Just when I was about to tell him the good news, Denver had already penned down his signature to end this marriage. I looked up at him in disbelief, but his eyes were empty and void. I couldn't believe I fell victim to Malik Denver. How foolish of me to think that I could actually change him. How foolish of me to fall for him at all. "It's over." He pressed his lips into each other. There was a stabbing pain in my chest and a crack in my voice. I don't understand," I stuttered. "What's there not to understand? I want a fucking divorce." 2 years, that was it. That was the entire plan. I gave 2 years of my life to you, and you have given me nothing, Eliana. You know this isn't working. The truth is you've known for a long time now. There's no point in waiting anymore. This has to end now." Denver raised his voice. "But I love you," it escaped my lips. I didn't know how, neither did I know why, but I blurted it out. And I guess some part of me was expecting some grand confession next. Rather, all that slapped me in the face was a hoarse scoff. "You can't love me." The Alpha shrugged. "This was merely an arrangement. I've made that pretty clear from the start." "But I do," I interrupted him, and sharply. He drew back with his knuckles against his teeth. "Well, I don't love you," Denver yelled. "I don't love you, Eliana. I never have. This was never what I wanted. I don't love you, I never have. But you're my mate," I whimpered, desperately wanting to hold on to him as I cried. "Then I reject you," he coldly refuted. I, Alpha Malik Denver, hereby reject you, Eliana Jacobs, as my mate, bringing an end to this union." His voice felt like a sword that went through my chest, slicing my heart into a million tiny pieces. He looked at me with a commanding glare, and I knew I didn't have much of an option. "I, Eliana Jacobs, accept your rejection," I whispered. There was no mending of a heart that had been broken so much like mine. There was the man who saved me 2 years ago, but the Denver standing in front of me was different. Or perhaps these were his truest colors, and for the first time, my eyes weren't clouded by delusions. I broke down into tears, but all he cared about was signing the papers. He tapped against the sheet and a tear of mine soaked through it. "You have until tomorrow to sign it, and come up with the next plan as to where you would stay from now. I'd grant you a leave if that's what you want. But besides that, I have nothing else to give you." Eliana Denver brushed into his shoulders as he walked out of the door. It closed behind him, but for the most of it, his words were still in the air. So was his cologne and his presence. I heard his voice echo through the door, and almost suddenly another. It was an effeminate voice chuckling alongside his. My curiosity was what shattered me as I leaped closer to the door. I opened it slightly to peek, and Denver was in the arms of another woman so quickly. She had long blonde hair and skin blemishly white as milk. Her clothes barely covered the right parts of her body, but his hands did. She was really beautiful and had everything I didn't. "Come on, let's go upstairs." Her voice was all giggly as she wrapped her arms around him. Denver crashed his lips into hers, leading her to the stairs, but before he left, he darted one last glare back to me. Like he knew I was watching, he knew I was shattered, but he just didn't care. This was the moment that sparked for me, and to think I was already envisioning a future where we could be a happy family. Him and I and the child in my womb, who he didn't still know about, who he never would. Denver was a horrible person, and I'd only just realized that today. I didn't want that sort of a father for my kid, and neither did I want him to stay with me only because I was pregnant. It was clear he never felt anything for me over the past 2 years, so it was almost a genuine fear that he might try to take the baby away from me. He didn't deserve the child. He didn't deserve me. I lunged myself to the table, across which were the divorce papers, and with quivering hands, I took up the pen, signing alongside his. I fought to hold back the tears in my eyes, but I failed miserably. I couldn't believe this was the end. I wanted nothing more than to leave. There was no place for me here. There hadn't been over the past 2 years. Even as I scavenged through my wardrobe, I realized none of the things actually belonged to me. I could set this whole place ablaze in anger, but rather, I chose to walk away, leaving him his ring on the table. I was utterly defeated and dispirited as I walked out those doors. All I knew was I never wanted to see Denver again. I wanted a fresh start, in a place outside of Oakland or Toomsdale, a place very far away from here. I'd walked in with the brightest of smiles, but here I was, leaving with a river of tears. The winds blew through my hair as I took a brave step forward. The intention was to leave everything behind, a fresh start. A new life, just me. My hands fell to clasp my barely showing stomach and my child. That was the day I truly left my terrible past behind, heading towards an even more uncertain future. But if there was one thing that I knew, it was that no one could ever find out about the Alpha's secret baby. No one. Denver. The cold air blew past the curtains, filling the room with an eerie atmosphere. I turned around before opening my eyes. She wasn't there. It was a fortnight, and usually the morning after. Eliana stayed in my bed. She would have somehow managed to squeeze herself into my arms, cuddling tight like a monster was going to get a hold of her. And when I would open my eyes, they would be on her forehead. Her hair would get into my mouth, and her vanilla fragrance would fill the room. "I'm sorry," Her voice was usually so soft and delicate, especially in the mornings. She would say that before pulling away, as if she wouldn't end up in my arms the next time we spent the night together. I would scoff, but a smirk would cripple my lips when I turned away. However, this was the first morning after a fortnight that Eliana wasn't in my bed. It was Claire who was, a hooker slumped by the edge about a distance from me. I cringed the moment I opened my eyes. The room felt so empty, my arms were. Eliana was nowhere to be found. Then, as I got up, rubbing my eyes, I remembered last night. Giving her the divorce papers had been long time coming today, made it a full 2 years since our engagement, and Eliana was still without a child. Everyone was talking. My father himself was growing impatient, and most of all, I couldn't risk her falling more and more in love with me. It was evident that she already had. I didn't believe in love. I didn't think I would ever fall for just one person, so I had to let her go. My eyes darted back to Claire, and a heavy sigh escaped my lips. I got out of bed. Eliana's cologne still lingered in the air, settling in the depths of my stomach. The room, the hallway, everything felt so empty without her. Even in the kitchen, by now she would have already made breakfast, presenting them with a gleeful smile. She wasn't the best cook, but she told me she learned while she was a slave in her pack. She was the one who usually cooked for everyone and cleared and washed the dishes. Sometimes I didn't think it was fair how they treated her. Eliana wasn't my enemy. Her pack was. It was the reason I saved her that day. That, and marrying an insider into Bloodhound. She was broken and wounded, slumped to the ground. Only later did she tell me about her stepbrother, and the vile things Jackson had done to her. It might have been 2 years since then, but I knew it still haunted her. Some nights, she still even nightmares. He was the biggest asshole and I should have treated him as a lesson, only that she begged. She just wanted to leave everything behind her. I remembered everything Eliana told me since the night I rescued her. It just unconsciously remained in the back of my mind. But most of all, what stuck and kept echoing in my ears up until this morning was what she said last night. "You're my mate," she claimed. It couldn't be. It clearly wasn't true. I'd searched for many years before for my mate, even before my wolf grew feral without a connection. But I didn't see her. Everyone said I didn't have a mate because you ought to meet her before turning 25. It wasn't odd to have been skipped by the moon goddess. I'd only just accepted my fate, that I was meant to be alone. So how could Eliana Jacobs say that I, Malik Denver, was her mate? I didn't feel any sort of way with her. Nothing special. Not with anyone in my entire life. It was only an arrangement with Eliana, you see. Oftentimes I thought that I wasn't born to love, but to rule. Those things could never mix, and when it did, it was a recipe for disaster. My father learned the hard way when he held my mother's lifeless body in his hands the night after the Cold War. It was the last time all the werewolves in the world were in one place. We all lost someone that day, and he lost the love of his life. I lost my mother. Seeing how shattered he was, even after, I was convinced love was a terrible thing because you aren't guaranteed eternity, are you? It was selfish enough that the moon goddess would give you someone, and then take that person from you. Most days, I remember my mother. She was cheerful with a smile that could light up a room. She was caring and devoted to my father especially. She could step in front of a bullet to save the ones she loved. She was all that a Luna was meant to be, the first and only woman I'd ever loved. But then she died a horrible death, and it was messed up. I was messed up for so long. And when something like that happens, it's hard to believe love exists. After the war, the whole werewolf kingdom decided to separate, not only into packs and clans, but far apart from each other. Black Moon stayed in Tombsdale, and Bloodhound was in its outskirts. We were not so far away from each other, so there was always a sense of rivalry between the two packs, especially when it came down to land and societal hierarchy. But it's been many years we've been here now. Nothing so contingent to cause a battle, and it better stay that way. I didn't feel anything for Eliana Jacobs. Not only was she in a rival pack, but she was also an Omega, the lowest level of a werewolf. An alpha like myself could never be mated to an Omega slave. So Eliana was wrong. Eliana! I called out her name as I stormed into her room, and when the doors flung wide open, I was met with the echo of my voice. It was eerily silent. Her windows were taped shut, and so was her wardrobe. Her bed was as neatly laid as she hadn't spent the night there, and on the top of her dresser were the divorce papers. My heart shuddered as soon as I saw her signature penned at the bottom of the page. It was just a surprise to see that she had already signed it. Attached to the document was another thin sheet of paper, and I could recognize her handwriting even from a mile away. I realized it was a letter after I opened it, and my eyes read along the lines. Hello, Denver. It's funny how I can't even bring myself to write your name anymore. I've already packed my things, but here I am, sitting and hoping that you would walk back into the room and tell me it was all a lie. Tell me you didn't mean anything you said just now. But I know you won't. I realize now how delusional I've been the last 2 years. I mean, you're Malik Denver. How did I ever think you could love someone like me, an Omega slave? It was only an arrangement, so I've signed the divorce papers. You asked me last night to decide what I wanted, and although it wasn't easy, I've decided to leave. I'm leaving Black Moon and I'm leaving you. I don't exactly know where I'm going, but it will be somewhere far away from Oakland. Somewhere for a fresh start. To start a new life, and I owe it to you. I owe it to you because you saved my life that night and you took me in. I hope I've been able to repay my debt over the last 2 years, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to give you a child. I hope I never see you again. Goodbye, Denver. With love, Eliana. I read through the letter and I felt a hard lump form in the back of my throat. I didn't feel anything for Eliana Jacobs. I had to remind myself, because I was immensely moved by her letter. My fingertips trailed the edges of the white paper, and I could feel a certain level of rage pump through my veins. She had left. She had run away like she did from her own pack. I stormed out of her room, meeting a few of the maids already gossiping in groups. They dispersed at the sight of me, but I knew it was only long before they realized what had happened. What happened? My father suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and I pushed the lump down my throat. My hands folded into a tight fist, and I gazed into his eyes. "Where is Eliana?" he asked, and I shut my eyes. Eliana is gone. Eliana. Xyerslater. My eyes settled on the untamed flames of the bonfire, and even with the warmth that emitted from it. It was still a cold night in the mountains of Tuscany, where I'd stayed for the last 6 years. There was a rumble in the skies above me, preceded by a bolt of lightning that struck the earth. The breeze was cold against my skin, grazing through my hair which swayed left and right. I folded my arms with the jacket over my shoulders. Until the rain started to pour, I wouldn't go back into my tent. I resolved in my head. It had rained heavily here each night for the past week. And although it was hard to believe the Tuscany mountains were a real place, they really were. I had to see for myself when I stumbled here one random day 6 years ago, after journeying halfway across the earth in search of a home. There wasn't one quite as welcoming as here. But the weather said otherwise. Of course, I had found ways to cope, but still, on some days when the harsh winds would blow, I was reminded that this place wasn't my home. Not that it wasn't Bloodhound or Black Moon, as you have seen. All my life I've always struggled to fit in. It wasn't any different now with the humans. Tuscany was filled with them. It was about 95% mountains and forest, but the remaining 5% were humans. Not a single shifter was here. It was nothing like Oakland, which was a good thing because when I arrived here, that was exactly what I was looking for: a fresh start. A new beginning. for both myself and my help. "Help, Mom!" Immediately drawing me out of my thoughts were the screams that echoed from inside the tent. I arose and burst through the zipper, grasping his little hands as he shivered. Elijah was panting with beads of sweat forming along the lines of his forehead. He was drenched, and he was quivering like he'd just seen a ghost. "Are you okay?" I held him close to my chest, placing a soft kiss against his forehead, and his breathing slowed down after some time. Then he could speak. The first thing he did was lift his gaze into my eyes. "I had a nightmare." There was a crack in his voice, and I could see in his eyes that he was so afraid. "It's okay." I held him tighter. "It's not real. You're here with me now." "Mommy's here," I heaved, and as the winds started to howl outside the tent, I finally closed it up. I could still see the reflection of the fire as it started to die down because of the rain. But soon after, it had completely disappeared. Elijah had fallen asleep again in my hands, and I heaved a deep breath as I looked down at him. As I said, this was supposed to be a fresh start, a new beginning for myself and my son, Elijah. But these days, it started to feel like the exact opposite. 24. 25. 25 fuck. I cussed as I fell on my bed, heavy breaths escaping from my lips. I turned to face Alicia, who was counting my push-ups, and as she handed me the bottle of water, she had disappointment in her eyes. "That's far less than the last time," she muttered, reaching for my hands to help me up. I leaped to my feet, gushing down the water and then wiping the sweat across my face. It was the next morning after a heavy downpour, and it looked nothing like it had rained last night. The sun was shining intensely in the skies, and everyone had come out of their tents for their exercise. Life in Tuscany was a routine. You get up as early as 6 a.m. and training starts. Breakfast is strictly by 10 a.m., not a second less or a second more, and it was only for about an hour. Training continues until noon, and then we're allowed into the woods to hunt down dinner. That could last for hours, and alas, by 6 p.m., we return back to the tent with our pears and our game. Sometimes it felt like nothing had changed. The trees surrounding us were just like Oakland, well, the part of it that wasn't the city. And the commune I was in was very similar to how packs operate. The routine, dining together, training, but at least I wasn't a slave to these people like I was to my own pack. They were strangers and humans, but they also opened their arms to me and my child when I wandered here 5 years ago. They knew very little of where I came from, nor did they know anything about my past. I acted lost and naive, which wasn't really a facade because I was lost. I'd left Denver without thinking about where I was even going, and to top it all off, I wasn't just responsible for myself, but for the child I was carrying. Those weeks on the roads were the toughest, and I didn't even think I would make it alive as a rogue. I just kept walking and running and walking for weeks on end, months, until I ended up here, and it's where I've been with Elijah ever since. I didn't think I ever wanted to leave again. Here, they knew me as a human and Elijah too. It was like I could be someone different, away from my past and all the trauma I'd endured. I was no longer Eliana. I went by Anna here. It was what everyone, including Alicia, knew me as. It was tough keeping my secret sometimes, and although it helped that I still hadn't come fully into my wolf form, at this I had given up. But it was especially harder when you have a growing son whose wolf aspects wasted no time in kicking in. Elijah was 6 years old now. His violent nightmares started when he was 5. It was accustomed to the male shifters at the infancy stage, and so was the increased awareness and heightened senses. I had to hide that from everyone else in the commune because we were humans here. I thought we could be, but with each day that passed, I realized it was impossible. But I didn't want to leave, I told myself. If I did, there was nowhere else to go. "I'll do better tomorrow," I nodded at Alicia, who scoffed lightly from her lips. At that moment, there was a bell that rang from a distance, and I pulled out my phone to check the time. "It's 10. I reflexively announced, kicking my feet forward. Time for breakfast. My eyes searched through the dispersing crowds for Elijah. "Where is my son?" I asked, and Alicia shrugged her shoulders. I faced the children's section, where I had just seen him some seconds ago. But he had disappeared now. My heart stomped in my chest as I walked back, in the opposite direction from where everyone else was facing. "Have you seen Elijah?" I started to ask, gliding through shoulders and bodies. "Freya." I grasped his nature teacher, and she was startled at first. The rest of the kids were packing up, but Elijah was still missing. "Where is he?" I panted heavily. "I was just looking for you." She gritted through her teeth, and it was a tone that showed something was clearly wrong. She roped my hands into a tent, and I expected to see Elijah. But instead, it was another kid who was bleeding from his mouth. That isn't Elijah," I stuttered, and Freya looked me dead in the eyes. "You don't say?" she remarked. "This is Chester, one of the kids in Elijah's grade and a very close friend of his. Today, Elijah attacked Chester, and he's the reason for the bleeding, as you can see," Freya said, and I clutched my lips immediately. "Where is he?" "This is the third fight he's been involved in, and it's only just been a week. The rest of his mates are scared of him. He's a monster." Chester interrupted, and his eyes were filled with tears. Soon, mine began to water too. "Anna," Freya called, and I looked back at her. "I'm afraid if this happens again, you and Elijah might have to leave the commune. The safety and wellness of everyone is our utmost priority," and her voice started to fade into my ears, and it was barely audible at this point. I plunged myself outside the tent, and my vision dazed as I stared ahead at the woods. I closed my ears with my hands and shut my eyes until I was relieved again, and by this time, Freya was right next to me. "Where is he?" I asked her for the last time, and she threw a look into the woods. He ran away without waiting to hear another word. I sprinted down the hill and ran through the forest. "Elijah!" I yelled his name. This had only happened once in the past, and the fear was just as crippling. "Elijah!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, shaking my head off every negative thought that was telling me something bad had already happened to him. My feet splattered through the muddy earth as I went deeper into the thick forest, and it was darker with each step I took. But alas, I found him. Beneath an enclosed shed with his back against a tree and his arms around his knees. "Elijah," I gasped in relief, throwing myself forward to where he was. He turned to me, and I immediately grasped him in for a hug. The tears in my eyes streamed down my flustered face. I was so worried I wept, and there was a crack in my voice. "You can't leave me like that, Elijah. I told you, and you promised the last time I looked into his eyes, and they were so afraid." I couldn't even yell at him. "I'm sorry, Mommy," he apologized. "I didn't want you to be worried." "It's okay," I held his hands. "They were just saying so many mean things about me in class today. Chester, too. And I thought he was my friend. I just got so angry and I don't know what came over me," he explained, and I pushed a hard lump down my throat. Of course I knew what came over him. It was his wolf. That's the thing. He wasn't a human. He didn't even know that himself. None of them knew. Maybe this was a bad idea, and as much as I wanted it to be, Tuscany wasn't my home. It wasn't Elijah's home. He ought to be around a pack of wolves who could train him to control his anger and be noble. They couldn't do that here. But then again, his pack was I'm pretty sure non-existent at this point. It had been 6 years since I last heard from anyone in Oakland. "I don't really belong here, Mommy. No matter how hard I try, they still make fun of me. I can't ever fit in," and Elijah broke down into tears on my shoulders. And as a mother, hearing my child cry the way he did at that moment, it shattered my heart. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know," I replied softly with a hand smothering down his back. "This isn't your fault, Eli," I said before pulling away from him. "Well, punching Chester was," I scoffed, and he chuckled softly for a moment. "I told you before, use your words. Even when you're angry, use your words over your fist." I ran my hands through his hair, and he pouted. "It won't happen again, Mommy," he promised, even going as far as joining his pinky finger to mine, and I broke it off with a kiss. Pulling him up, we were set back down the hill when my phone suddenly rang. And I stopped in my tracks immediately. Nobody ever called. Pulling it out of my pocket, there was a furrow between my brows. And the voice that I heard next caused my heart to sink into my chest. My hand was shaking as I placed the phone to my ears. Eliana. Her voice was tender and shaky. No one had called me that in years. "Grandma?" I recognized her voice almost immediately, and hearing it again left a sting in my chest. "Eliana?" she called again, this time bearing as much familiarity. "It's your father." She wasted no time in breaking the news, and my heart leapt in the back of my throat. "He's deathly ill, Eliana. Please come back home." And those words kept ringing in my ear as I stood there. Come home. Home. Not Tuscany, not Tombsdale, but Oakland, my home. Eliana. Eliana, are you there? My grandmother asked, and a loud sob rang through my ears from over the phone. Heartbroken, terrified, and soul-shattering. I could hear the pain in her fragile, cracking voice. And soon, tears started to form in my eyes. I stopped in my tracks on my way down the hill, and Elijah was right beside me. It took a moment for me to fully grapple with what she was saying, and even longer for me to say anything back. I was just so confused. "I don't understand," I softly whispered. "Your father is sick, Eliana." I'd heard her the first time, but that was only one of the many things that raced through my mind at that moment. "No. How are you even? How are you talking to me right now?" I asked. "I thought you were dead, Grandma." "All those years they told me, Eliana," she interrupted. Her voice was just as I remembered. "I wasn't dead. Your father only kept me away. It was what Sienna wanted. She'd brainwashed him for all those years," she added, and I pushed a hard lump down my throat. "Now that he's sick, where is she?" "Where is Jackson?" I asked, and that name left a sour taste in the back of my mouth, and all my grandmother did was let out a heavy exhale. Thick with all her unmentioned worries, and I could tell whatever was going on in Oakland was pretty serious. "Oh, Eliana," she gasped. "Nothing is as it was anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your father fell ill not so long ago. Terribly stricken by a disease no one has a cure to. He first started to lose his memories and then all his strength. His health has deteriorated ever since, and these days, we're just counting down the days until—" She could barely continue, and I felt the tears stream down my cheeks. "Until he dies now, Eliana," and even with my rough relationship with my father, hearing those words still broke my heart into pieces. Those were words a daughter should never hear about her dad nonetheless. But that wasn't even all. And Sienna and Jackson, they're just waiting patiently for him to die, and for his alpha title to be stripped off him. Jackson's looked forward to the day that he's finally crowned alpha for so long now, and the people have dreaded that day. He's started to rule since your father got sick and incapable, and he's done so with an iron fist. He's been merciless to everyone under him. We're all treated like slaves, like it's a dictatorship. No one dares say too much or disobey him. And even now, I'm hearing of a war that he's declared. It's unsafe here in Bloodhound, Eliana. We're all just scared, and Jackson. He can't take over. If there was anyone familiar with Jackson's wrath, it was me. And suddenly, the memories of those nights that he would sneak into my dungeon came into my mind as hot, tumultuous flashes. I shut my eyes with my heart between my teeth. Of course, no one else knew but myself till now. He was only my stepbrother then, and he was so cruel. I couldn't imagine how ruthless he could become with so much power, as an alpha of the pack. Bloodhound, for that matter. A pack usually known for its peace and collectiveness, but also the same one that turned their backs on me when I needed them. The ones that blamed me unrighteously for my mother's death. What? What do you want me to do now, Grandma? I stuttered, and there came another sigh from her lips. There's only one person that can stop your brother from taking over and… Grandma, I interrupted because I knew exactly where this was going. As I stood still, the winds went through my hair and dried the tears on my cheeks. My throat was sore, and so were my eyes. That person is you, Eliana, she continued nonetheless. You are as much of an heir as he is, and if you come back and challenge for the role of an alpha, then it could block Jackson. Everyone knows that you would be a much better ruler than he could ever be, she whispered, and I shook my head. The same people that treated me like slaves? There was a crack in my voice. That made me go through all of that when I was just a little girl. Now you want me to abandon everything, including the life that I have made here, and you want me to come back and help them? I asked her. Eliana, because it's not fair, you know. It's not fair that you ask this of me, Grandma. I broke down into tears, and by the sound of her voice, I could tell she did too. We have nowhere to turn, Eliana. You're my last hope. You're the last hope of the entire pack. If Jackson rules, he would run the whole pack into the ground in no time, and Bloodhound would be no more. It would be worse than it already is, she said softly. I can't be Alpha, I muttered. And I can't be Luna. I can't be anything at all. I blurted out, this wasn't what I wasn't meant for. I can't take it, Grandma. Please don't make me take it, I whispered, and she hummed. Of course you can, she replied. You are meant for so much more even. Have you forgotten all those years that I told you day after day that you were special? I had to remind you, so you would never forget, my grandma said. But I shook my head. You have no idea what you're talking about because you left, I exclaimed. And my life was so unbearable for so many years. I never felt special, not for one day of my life. But I felt broken and shattered into pieces. I felt mistreated and worthless. I felt abandoned and devastated, hurt and dispirited, so you can't stand there and tell me that I'm special. I cried. I never left, Eliana, she answered. I never wanted to, but it was Sienna. She convinced them to take me into exile, and I, too, have spent so long in the darkness of the forest. I'd felt broken and devastated and dispirited and all those things when I thought I would never see you again, Eliana. But thankfully, your father has come to his senses, and so have the rest of the pack. The real villains are Sienna and Jackson, and they want to take everything from us. I pushed a hard lump down my throat before I echoed. Dad knows? Yes, she replied. Does he know that? Does he know that you called me? I whispered, and Grandma Abby heaved. Of course he does. It was his idea to come to me. It was also his idea to call you. She continued. He's realized his mistakes and how he'd treated and unfairly blamed you all those years for your mother's death. And I could sit on this end and tell you how sorry he was, but he wants a chance to tell you to your face. He wants you to come back home, Eliana. We all do. And there was such a time that those words would have meant the whole world to me, and I would have come running, but that was 6 years ago. So much had changed now. I was different. I had Elijah, a secret no one knew about, and it was going to stay that way. Alpha Denver could never know of his son, but the chances of him finding out were more if I moved back to Oakland. Besides, it wasn't even safe for me with Jackson, and how we last left off. So many odds were stacked against me, and my mind was filled with uncertainty and confusion. On one hand was Elijah, who was finding it so hard to fit in with the humans. I didn't blame him, because sometimes I don't think I fully have myself, but it could be so much better back in Oakland. he wouldn't have to feel so different. I would just have to keep him away from Tombsdale. There was a brief pause over the phone and my stomach had tied into a knot. "Mommy, are you okay?" Elijah asked softly, and I sniffled through my nose, wiping the tears from my eyes. "I am," I replied, holding him close, and the next thing I heard was my grandma's voice. "Who was that?" she asked, hearing him from over the phone, and a hard lump slipped down my throat. There was no use hiding him from her. She was the one person I could actually trust, and an idea struck me. It wouldn't be so bad if I kept Elijah with her amidst everything. It would be so helpful to know that he was with someone safe, someone who could take care of him and train him, just like she trained me. "It's my son," I whispered. There was a crack in her voice bridled with disbelief, and I nodded. "It's your grandson," a light-hearted sob echoed from her lips at my words, and as his fingers intertwined with mine, I drew him closer to me. "Don't worry, you'll meet him when I come back," I muttered before pressing my lips together, and my grandma gasped. "Eliana," she called softly, "you're coming back?" Did I have a choice? Of course I did, but I would be just as much of a monster as they were to me if I turned my back on them when they needed me. I could escape, hide, and run from Bloodhound, but the truth remains that it was still my pack. It was my home, not anywhere else. And most importantly, it was my mother's home. She loved the pack so dearly, and they meant so much to her. Even as she passed, they always said her last wish was that the pack never crumble. That we take care of each other, that they take care of me. I would do the same when I grow older. They failed on their end, but it didn't mean I had to on mine. After all, this was all for her. Everything I did was for my mother, even this decision I'd taken. "I'm coming back." My voice was low, and my eyes set on the Tuscany hills in the distance. I had to leave this place. "You don't know how much this means to me, Eliana." "To all of us," my grandma said. "It won't be an easy war standing up to Jackson, but I'm sure it would be one that we would win in the end, because it's a war we're fighting together," she continued, and I heaved in a deep breath. Like I said, things were different now. I wasn't who I was 6 years ago. Here in the commune, we trained every day to be warriors, to face the obstacles and grab them by their horns. We were trained to stand up to our greatest fears and the trauma of our past. We were trained to overcome, and so I had faith too. And Jackson didn't scare me so much anymore. I could finally, after so long, face him and charge him for all the terrible things he'd done to me. And in the end, I could rescue my pack with Elijah by my side. "It wouldn't be so hard now, would it?" "Eliana," my grandma called after a while, and I held the phone against my ears. Her words slipped easily from her lips, falling to cradle around my heart, and a smile crept to my lips. "Your mother would be so proud," she'd said softly before hanging up the call. As the winds flushed into my face, I sucked in a deep breath, and Elijah squeezed my hand. "Who was that?" he asked, and I looked at him. "Was that Daddy?" Those words escaped his lips, and it stung my heart so suddenly. I looked into Elijah's eyes. This was the first time he called that name, and he meant it. Caught off guard, I fluttered my eyelashes. "No." I paused, and Elijah shrugged before making his way down the hills. "No, it was not." And as soon as I reached the bottom of the hill, I was met with Alicia. "There you are," she exclaimed. "You missed breakfast." "Yeah, I shrugged my shoulders. I wasn't hungry." "Are you okay? Your face seems a little flustered," she noted, and I just scoffed lightly. "You know what? I'm okay, Alicia." I reached out to her shoulders before flashing a smile at her. "And thank you," I continued. "Over the last 6 years, Alicia has been my closest friend here. But as I looked at her and around the mountains, I knew it was time to go. Thank you for everything." I left her with a furrow between her brows as I drew Elijah's hands. Hey, I want to tell you something. I held him close. Because where do I even begin? I threw one last look back at Alicia, and it was the last time I ever saw her. Because immediately the clock struck midnight and the beginning of a new day, I woke Elijah up in the tent. I'd already packed my things and his, and he knew what was going on. Well, enough, he knew enough. It's time, I whispered, beneath the sound of the cricket noises, and he yawned with his arms above his head. I carried him on my back, climbing out of the tent and down the hill. On one side were the forests and the other one took you outside Tuscany hills. However, it wasn't until I reached beside the giant billboard that said goodbye to the mountains that I realized this was truly happening. The night was mercilessly cold and I gazed into the star-filled skies for a moment. I was really leaving, and most of all, I was really going back. Come on. After so long, I was going back home. Eliana. The bumpy roads caused my shoulders to sway back and forth, gnashing against the sides of the truck. I was in the back, alongside all the other travelers after we alighted from the train that brought us into New Orleans. I knew my way from there. Squatting in the back of the truck with a helmet around my head and blanket wrapped around both Elijah and myself, we finally arrived at the town's market. Oakland was not so far from here, but to get across to it, I needed to go through Tombsdale. The scent of the ever-dark and eerie town sent a shiver up my spine, and Elijah jerked forward immediately after the truck came to a halt. The driver alighted and opened the back for us to come down. Come on. I held around my son's shoulders, holding him up so he didn't fall. His eyes were obviously still blurry as he'd just woken up, and the sun was merciless in its shining from above the horizon. I couldn't remember the last time I saw a morning as bright as this. Tuscany could be hot, but we never really saw the sun because of the 1,000 mountains that surrounded us. So it could be shining with all its might, but the most we'd get is the wind. The breeze here was gentle, only carrying a few strands of hair which I neatly tucked behind my ears. It was still the market. On one end was Tombsdale, which led directly to Oakland, but on the other, a more further journey went into the city from where I would now enter into Oakland. There was no way I was stepping foot in Tombsdale, not when Denver could very much be hiding in the trees like he usually does, and most certainly not when I'm with Elijah. The market was busy, and as soon we stepped down from the truck, I grasped his little hands in mine. Where are we? His voice was subtle and meek as I glided my shoulders through the marketers. Mommy, he persisted, even though I didn't dart an eye at him. Not until we made it out of there, and ahead of us was a busy highway, flooding with cars speeding back and forth. This is New Orleans, I yelled, leaning over his ears, and the winds from the road flushed into my face. You said we were coming home? Elijah wasn't so confident with the sound of his voice. The highway scared him. I could tell by how tight he gripped around my wrist. Fear crippled his eyes. I know a shortcut. Grudgingly, I drew him toward the forest. We trailed in between a path between two forests, and occasionally, we came across a person or two. For most of the journey, however, it was quiet. Are you tired? I strapped my bag tighter around my shoulder, and Elijah lifted his gaze to me. You said we were going home, he echoed again. Looking ahead of us, I narrowed my vision. We are going home, I replied. So I'll never see Chester and Harry again? His cheeks lit up as he yelled, Yeah, we're not going back to Tuscany. I couldn't tell whether or not he was relieved at the news. I'm sorry, I muttered nonetheless. Are you kidding me? I'm so happy, he chanted, and his voice was so pitchy, screaming through his missing front teeth. A smile crept to my lips as I ran my hands through his hair. Really? Conversation made the journey faster. We just kept walking through and through, and luckily, the trees shielded the harsh sun. Yes, and if we're going home? Elijah shot me a glare. Yeah? That means I get to meet my dad, right? He asked, and my heart sank into my chest. The smile across my lips faded into oblivion, And now fear crippled my eyes. Right? Elijah echoed, and I forced a hard lump down my throat. Where is he? He asked. Who is he? I should have known that all it would take was the first time for his curiosity to heighten. I knew ultimately questions like these would come, but he was a little boy. I didn't know he'd start asking about his father now. How could I explain the world's most ruthless wolf was his dad? Or that I had to run away after he had rejected me? How could I tell him the truth, but at the same time, how could I look into his eyes and lie to him? Elijah stopped in his tracks and his brows furrowed. Did I say anything wrong, Mommy? His voice was disheveled, and I squeezed his palms. No, I exclaimed. This was all me. No, you didn't say anything wrong. It's just that Chester talks about his dad all the time and how much he loves him, and he asked me about mine. I told him I didn't know where he was, and Chester said it was because he didn't love me, Elijah narrated, and it broke my heart to hear him talk like that. Of course not, I whispered. So my dad loves me? He asked, and I nodded my head. Can I see him? I want to hear it from his mouth, Elijah added, and I sucked in a deep breath through my lips. Squatting to the ground, I never let go of his hands, and I looked into his eyes. Your father loves you, Elijah. Even though he's not here right now, he's just very busy. I could never lie to you, right? Mommy can never lie to you. I scoffed lightly, and he pressed his lips together softly. You will see him. One day, at least, I knew within myself that it was true. It was inevitable. One day, Denver would find out, but at least not today, nor tomorrow. Not all the years before he turns 20, at least. Elijah was a wolf, but I had to protect him from all that darkness, and at the same time reassure him that this wasn't his fault. The things that happened had already happened, and it was a long time ago. I would never want him to feel like a mistake because he ended up being the greatest gift of my entire life. He was my entire life. Your father loves you, and I love you even more. My hands caressed his cheeks. And I'll always protect you, okay? Nothing will ever harm you, I said, and Elijah looked at me. Not even the monsters? He asked, and an arch came between my brows. The monsters? I was stunned. The ones in my nightmares. The ones you said weren't real. He lowered his voice, and I could see the fear in his eyes. All I did was hold him closer to my chest, and I heaved a whisper through his ears. Not even the monsters, I promised him. And there was a brief pause for the moment. I held on to him. I couldn't even pretend like a million thoughts weren't racing through my mind. But then he screamed. Ice cream! Elijah jerked out of my hands, and just in front of us was a singing pickup truck. I looked at his dazzling eyes and pouty lips as he tried to guilt-trip me. Please, he begged, and grudgingly, I pulled out some of the spare change I still had, handing it over to him. He scurried across the road, but not so far that I couldn't see him. I stood by the sidewalk with my arms folded across my chest, and I looked around. But alas, it wasn't long until a strange sensation hit me. I suddenly felt uneasy, and my stomach was in a tight knot. There was this eerie feeling that I was being watched. I ran my hands across my arms as I turned around, but there was nothing so unusual. Besides the ice cream truck and the couple that was seated across the roadside bench, nothing out of the ordinary. I reminded myself to breathe. Perhaps it was only PTSD from the last time I ended up in this forest. It was not so far from Tombsdale that I had no other option besides the highway. I closed my eyes for a second, calming myself down, but then a harsh breeze suddenly hauled its way past me, and a wolf scent stung my nose. Immediately my eyes charged up. I faced the forest ahead, and now I saw something. Someone, perhaps. It was dark, but I could see a pair of shiny, luscious eyes flowing back at me. I let out a gasp from my lips, across which my hands clamped. It was barely a minute, but I could make out the wall of a man. Not so much his face, but his aura was possessive. His scent drove me mad with fear. I pulled myself away, almost like I shouldn't be looking in that direction anyway. And the next thing I did was grasp Elijah by his hands. The ice cream almost fell, but he held onto it. I didn't care. I just needed to get the both of us out of there. I lunged myself through the trees, throwing breathy glances over my shoulders as I pushed forward. Adrenaline fired up my chest with every step I took, and my heart pounded against my sternum like a cannonball. I didn't fully breathe until I got out of the forest and ended up on the other side of the highway. I looked behind me, and alas, there was no one there anymore. Not even the scent. I held on to Elijah, but I clutched my chest with my other hand. I forced deep breaths out of my lips, and my eyes shimmered with tears. "What was that, Mommy?" Elijah softly asked. Pushing a hard lump down my throat, I shook my head. It was nothing. I lied to him for the second time that day. But I needed to convince myself that this one was true, that it was all my head. PTSD. Fucking PTSD. As I carried on, a thought hit me. I knew it wasn't Denver. I could scent him from a mile away. My wolf, although weak and buried, would have risen to the surface if it was him. He was my mate. But the person I'd just seen was stronger and ultimately more powerful. He was unlike anything I'd scented before, which was a harsh reminder, as it was a welcome back to Oakland. I finally crossed into the town, and the first thing that hit me was that smell, that familiar scent of home. But I lifted my gaze upon the earth. This place was unrecognizable. It didn't look like my home. Oakland was usually so bright with evergreen trees and colorful flowers, but staring now, it was almost as if drought had ravaged the land. There was barely any color, and the trees had fallen and withered. There was mourning in the air and darkness all around, even though it was only daytime. I knew immediately that this was Jackson, and my mom wasn't lying when she said Oakland wasn't as it used to be. Is this the place? Elijah was just as stunned as I was, and I sucked in a deep breath through my lips. But before I could say anything, a voice echoed from behind, and I turned around to face Adams. He was a beta the last time I was around, and he was usually so close to my grandma. I knew immediately that she'd sent him. He let his arms fall from his chest, and with an uncertain expression across his face, he parted his lips. "Welcome home," he said. Eliana. Grandma. I immediately threw myself into her arms as soon as I walked into the cabin doors. She was strapped to her wheelchair, but her arms were still strong enough to wrap around me. Tears welled up in my eyes before they came running down my cheeks. I never thought I'd see her again, and even after hearing her on the phone, it was nothing compared to actually seeing her holding her. And I sobbed onto her shoulders. "Eliana," she sang softly from her lips. "Oh, Grandma," I heaved, and there was no emotion quite like this. As Adam stood at the door with Elijah, it took me more than a moment to fully gather myself together. And when after I stood, my eyes were still, wet with tears. They fell to her, and so were her own. I stuttered. "I can't believe this." "Me neither," she echoed, intertwining her fingers with mine. I darted my eyes around the wooden cabin. It was warm and cozy in here, although it was a structure at the furthermost outskirts of Oakland. This was a place I never thought existed, and even for so long, I thought my grandma was dead. I was about 6 years old when they took her from me, and everyone called her crazy ever since the death of my mother, her daughter. But I knew she wasn't crazy. She was just hurt. But she looked different now, better. Maybe with a few more lines across her face, the wheelchair, and her eyes not being as sharp. She was nearly 75 years old and faring even better than some her age. I think it's a werewolf gene. We generally age better than humans. It was something I noticed back in Tuscany, but that wasn't what crossed my mind at that moment. Our eyes interlocked, and suddenly, I was 5 years old again in my grandma's arms, and she was watching over me as I fell asleep, whispering beneath her voice how special I was. And she may have looked different now, but she was still the same. "Welcome, Eliana." She paused. "Welcome home." I sat on the couch and it gave a little squeak. My eyes still roamed around the room. I assumed this was where she was for the past 6 years. It was then Adams wheeled her out. She had said he was her caretaker, ordered by my father to watch over her. She held in her arms 2 cups of coffee, and I instantly rushed to relieve them from her hands. She insisted on making them, Adams muttered, when my eyes met his, and I chuckled softly. She could be rather stubborn sometimes, but like I said, nothing had changed. "I'm so happy you're back," she whispered as I took a sip of my warm coffee. I swallowed it down my throat, even closing my eyes to savor the taste. "Oh, I've missed this." The smell of freshly brewed coffee swept through my nose. Tuscany had nothing like this. "I'm happy too, Ma," I heaved. Just then, an emotion flashed across her face for barely a second, and the smile faded slowly from her lips. "I remember it like it was yesterday," she started. Placing the cup on the table, an arch appeared between my brows. "I never wanted to leave you, Eliana. But Sienna, she captured me when your father wasn't there. She'd been trying to get rid of me ever since their marriage because I never gave my blessings." Nana paused before lifting her face to me. "How could I?" There was a crack in her voice. "She stole everything that belonged to your mother, and everyone was just trying to forget her. Your father included, and I didn't want to. Susanna's not just something that could be replaced, and deep down, I was scared that even when you grew up, you wouldn't know who your mother was. So I fought. They called me crazy, but I still fought. And at the end of the day, the devil won in the end." Her voice broke. "Not only did she silence me, but she managed to get me exiled out here, and I don't know what she told your father, but he agreed to it. And this." She looked around the room, her eyes brimming with tears. "This is where I've been for the past few years, and I can't ever go back." My heart shattered, hearing her speak of this, finally knowing that all of this was because of my mother. Because she didn't want her to be forgotten. Sienna was evil, but I never knew she was to this extent. It was one of the reasons I was back here. They weren't even full bloodhounds, but because of my mother. She and Jackson had gained so much power that they seemed unstoppable. They thought they could make our lives a living hell and get away with it. My grandmother built this pack from after the Cold War, when it was nothing, shredded and withered into pieces. She should never have been unjustly exiled. And since it was nothing we took pretty seriously, I understood now why she wasn't able to come back for me. Why she never stepped foot back into the pack. To go against an exile rule was an unforgivable taboo, punishable by the death penalty. It was one of the many harsh traditions and laws that governed the entire pack. Grandma always said how Mum was against them, and how she was fighting to get these laws reversed, for our freedom. But it was a fight she never saw to the end because of what happened. I saw what had become of Oakland today, and the first thing I could think of was how much it would break her heart to see the same thing. The land was dry and infertile, the trees were gone, roads were broken down, and even the sign that was our pride in Oakland no longer flickered. The town was dying, they said, but the truth was it was already dead. "I'm so sorry." My Janana reached for my hands again after wheeling a lot closer to where I was. As tears formed in my eyes, I looked around until they fell to the table right beside me. Across it was a framed photo, and I recognized the 2 people in it almost immediately. Was this her? I pointed to my grandmother, and her lips broke into a smile. "Yes," she said softly. "That's Susanna. That's your mother." The tears rolled down my cheeks and plastered against the frame. I stared into her forever youthful eyes, and that smile everyone always said looked like mine, and by everyone, I meant my grandma. She wasn't lying. Even my eyes were the same color and the way we stood. Seeing this photo filled me with so much purpose and an indescribable emotion. "She was beautiful," I whispered. Nana nodded. "I gave you a photo of her," she added, and I reached into my pocket, pulling out from a section of my wallet a tiny picture, which I handed over to her. "I still have it," I whispered. And it was a picture she gave me when I was 6 and started to ask questions about my mother. I guess it didn't really hit me until then why I was being punished by everyone else. And that was the day I truly understood what had happened. I held that photo, promising to keep it forever, the last thing of hers that I had. And through everything, from Denver to Tuscany, over the last 6 years, I took it everywhere with me. And my grandmother had a proud smile across her face as she gave it back to me. "And you?" she heaved as my eyes fell to my hands. "Where have you been?" Alas, the question I dreaded but one I could never escape. Where should I even begin? I thought to myself. Is it from when Alpha Denver rescued me while I was fleeing from my rapist stepbrother? Or when I fell in love with the Alpha, even going as far as a marriage of convenience? A marriage that he ended after 2 years. And even after finding out that I was his mate, he still rejected me, but unknown to him, I was finally pregnant with his child, a child who I ran away with, halfway across the world until I ended up in a cult-like commune, and that's where I've been for the last 6 years. I could tell her that at once and watch my Nana succumb to a heart attack. I mean, it was the story of my life that even I couldn't believe sometimes. But it was what happened. I pressed my lips together. I later settled on an answer, and I'm glad she took it as I didn't want to talk about it. Not yet, at least. So she just left it at that. Her fingers crawled to my face as she caressed my cheeks softly. I let out a light scoff. The necklace, too. I suddenly remembered, and even she arched her brows. It wasn't until I called Elijah to stand in front of her and showed her the pendant he was wearing around his neck that she smiled. I held onto it after all these years, I added proudly. I figured it was something he should have, something of hers since he didn't really know anyone. "You know," I whispered, and Elijah slouched into my arms. I get that he was shy. He wasn't this naturally quiet. But then again, this was someplace he'd never been. Nana slowly reached for his arms, and I turned him to face her. "Elijah, I want you to meet someone," I whispered into his ears. He lifted his gaze, and her eyes watered yet again. I didn't even know you had a son," she muttered, and a hard lump slipped down my throat. "Well, no one does," I whispered. "And I'd like to keep it that way. For now," I continued. "I was thinking he could stay with you in the meantime." "Mommy," Elijah called, and I held onto his arms. It's okay. I'm not going anywhere now," I assured. "You'll just be safer here, and even if I do leave, I'm always going to come back," I promised him, not realizing the weight of such a promise, especially when waging a war. He sulked before running down the corridor that led into a spare room. And when we were alone, Nana looked at me, and it was like I could hear even all the words that she didn't say. "Who's the father? Since when are you okay?" she finally asked, and I smiled back at her, hoping that was enough at that moment. "I am," I nodded convincingly, even though I had yet to forget my encounter with the strange shadow earlier that day. Whenever I remembered, it still sent a shiver down my spine. Could it have been Elijah's father? Was Denver just so different that I couldn't recognize him now? It took a lot to grasp me out of my subconscious, and by a lot, I meant my grandma's voice. "Adam?" she called, looking pointedly across the room as he inched closer. He'd only just gotten off the phone. "Jackson is back. He's already asking after me," Adams muttered, and I looked at my Nana, a little unsure. "Don't worry, Adam is very loyal to me," she assured. And I took her word for it. He needs to go back now. And you're sure he doesn't know that I'm back yet? I questioned. We were extra careful driving here. I'm not sure anyone else does, he replied. So how am I going to see my dad? What's the plan here? The moonlight ball is tomorrow night, he said after a brief pause. I'll get you into Villa when everyone else is gone. Then, you'll be able to see him, Adams instructed. For now, the best thing to do is to lay low. Jackson mustn't know you're back. He gritted through his teeth, and perhaps that was the moment it truly dawned on me what I was entering, and I had no idea what was coming. You see, this was just the beginning. Eliana. It was well into the dead of night when the car came to a halt. I gazed outside my windows to see people flood through the villa's entrance. They were dressed extravagantly in the brightest colors, even some wearing masks. That sort of thing wasn't unusual in werewolf ball parties. In fact, I looked to Adam, who had driven me here. I told you. He heaved. You were right. Braiding the rope of my mask through my hair, I balanced it upon the bridge of my nose, and a scoff escaped my lips. Only then was I ready to alight, and he came down too. We walked up the sidewalk before I turned to the side again. This is the perfect disguise. We made our way up the steps, gliding through the bodies of pack members scattered around the pub, and it wasn't until we entered through the door that Adams and I came to a halt. Looking around, it wasn't any more quieter inside here. The air was filled with the intoxicating blend of laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint melodies of a live jazz band. This way, Adams drew my hand as we dashed through the heart of Oakland's grandest party, the Moonlight Ball. Not even once a year, this was a special party that was only observed right before the swearing of a new Alpha King. The Moonlight Ball would act as his final opportunity to seek a bride of the 1,001 eligible spinsters and princesses that would come lining up in front of him. At the end of the night, he must then make his decision, and the bride would move into the villa without wasting a second. The marriage would be imminent, this was tradition. There wasn't any proclaimed Alpha King that hadn't gone through this. In fact, it was even how my dad met my mom. She struck her neck up amidst the crowd, and like a light in a dark room, she drew his eyes toward her, and her alone. The two of them met during his ball almost 30 years ago, and now, unfortunately, it was Jackson's turn. His eyes had coveted the crown and Alpha title for so long now. He was growing so impatient that he'd already set in tow all the marriage rites even before my father passed. I stopped in my tracks for a moment as my eyes scanned the crowds. The most beautiful women had lined up, their faces caked with makeup as they desperately fanned themselves so that it didn't smear. They were in haste for their lives to change forever. I wish I could tell them that it was far from a fairy tale with Jackson. Eliana, Adams sharply called, and as I kicked my feet forward, a hard lump slipped down my throat. He drew my hands upstairs, and I knew the way to my father's room. The entire place hadn't changed so much. Jackson's downstairs with Sienna. They're going through his options for a bride, which could buy you some time, Adam whispered as we halted right in front of the door. I'm not sure how long, but you have to hurry up and wear the mask when you're coming out, so no one sees you. He then pushed the door, and they gave way with a creaky clang. The air that hit me in my face was familiar. Be careful. I'll be waiting for you outside upon throwing one last look over my shoulders. My eyes met Adam's before he closed the door. The immediate silence rang through my ears, and for a moment, all I could hear were the thuds of my feet against the wooden floor. I was careful as I walked further into the room. Although the corridor was dark, there was a candlelight set upon a table in the distance. It was warmer with each step I took closer, and the moment my eyes fell on him, my heart sank into my chest. I straightened my back, pulling away from the walls. He was backing me, but I met his eyes through the mirror. "Dad?" I called softly, and there was a sting in my chest. He was immobile in a wooden chair that faced the mirror, and seeing him so lifeless that way broke my heart into pieces. I threw myself in front of him, grasping his frail, tender hands in mine. His eyes fell to me with blankness, but I could tell he was still there. My grandma said he'd been sick for some time now, that it first started with memory issues some months ago. Then he couldn't go by the day doing the normal things he usually did. His cognitive abilities started to slow down, and he couldn't even move by himself. It was like he was dying slowly, like his body was giving out, but his soul was still fighting. I could see it in his eyes that he was a fighter. He was much worse than she'd described. Maybe she didn't want to break my heart by telling me the whole truth. My father says in that chair, hands crippled, and his neck bent to the side. He was drooling from his lips and his eyes, and the silence that existed at that moment was deafening. He was so much different the last time I saw him. Even though he hated me with a passion, all I ever wanted was his love. For him to one day step up for me against the abuse and the mistreatment. For him to look at me without feeling as much resentment that I took my mother's life. But all those years he hated me. And because of that, I started to hate myself too. I never got the validation from him, nor did I get a single word that wasn't a rain of insults. Yet in that moment, sympathy wrapped around my heart like a clenched fist, and a tear rolled down my cheeks. He's incapable of ruling over a pack now, Nana had said earlier that day, as I sat right next to her. And the people have started to notice. You can be anything in the world, but you can't be an incapable leader. Because as soon as the pack loses that respect for you, it's utter chaos. And it's not your father's fault, I know. He's been to every top doctor and medical personnel in all of New Orleans, the traditionalists, and even humans too. No one knows what this is. No one has the answer, she said, and I gulped down a hard lump through my throat. A painful sensation shot up my chest, and it never really left me until that night. Hey, I softly said, squeezing his hand softly. I raised his neck and wedged it more comfortably against the chair, and he closed his eyes in a way that showed relief. He didn't take them off me when they opened like he was trying to tell me something that his lips couldn't say. For the first time, he wasn't yelling. Yes, it's me, I whispered. It's your daughter, and I'm right here. His lips fell apart and his teeth ended up gnashing against each other like he was cold, and with all the strength he could garner, he stammered his name. Jay. Zon. Jackson, I repeated after him with an arch coming between my brows. What happened to him? I asked, although I knew it was a reach. All my dad did was just shake his head, and terror immediately filled his eyes. It's okay, I reassured. Grandma told me everything, about his plan to take over the pack even though you're still alive. And I won't allow it. I gritted through my teeth, and somehow he was able to hold my hands this time. Giving it a tender squeeze, he drew my eyes back to him. My father shook his head again as he pointed to me. Me? He nodded. Ma. Nana had said exactly the same thing earlier that day. So how are we going to challenge Jackson for the alpha title? I asked her that morning. Isn't there supposed to be some kind of battle? I wasn't so familiar with the rules and traditions of the pack. I've been away for 6 years, spare me. But at least I knew there was one way to challenge an alpha for the crown, and that was by declaring a battle. A battle where one must kill the other and the one who survives gets the crown. I couldn't face Jackson. Don't get me wrong. I've trained for the last 6 years to be a warrior back in the commune. It wasn't that I couldn't face him. I didn't want to. It was too risky, and I was still yet to see what he looks like now. No, Eliana, luckily, I wouldn't have to. There's one other way you can challenge him for the crown. Being the firstborn child of the throne, even as a woman, you are entitled by right to the crown. But I can't be an alpha, I interrupted. And Bloodhound wasn't as progressive yet to have their first soul-ruling Luna. I could force my way to the throne, but what was the point if they never respected me? Besides, building it back up from the mess it was now would take more than me. There was no way I could do this on my own. But your mate can. My grandma interrupted my thoughts, and I batted my lashes for a moment. My mate? I echoed. You may not be able to challenge for the crown all by yourself, not unless you present your mate as a contender. Now, he would be the one to fight Jackson, and should he win. You both get to rule the pack and Jackson's gone, she explained, but I was still hung up on that one word. Mate? Did she know who my mate was? This is unbelievable. This is impossible. Eliana. I can't, Ma. I shook my head. I don't have a mate, I lied. And even if I did, I would probably still prefer fighting Jackson myself, I added. And she heaved an exhausted sigh. But it's the only way, she chastised, but I ended up standing from the chair. I mean it. I can't, I argued. That's final. Storming out of the room, the memories flooded back to me in hot flashes. That night, him across the room, the papers laying in front of me, and his soulless eyes when he muttered those words. I, Alpha Malik Denver, hereby reject you, Eliana Jacobs, as my mate, bringing an end to this union. His voice sliced through my heart that day, and I don't think I ever fully healed. Sometimes, I thought there really was no healing from something like that. You see, in a lifetime, you only get one mate. But finding that person isn't always the hardest part. It's making sure that you both accept the mate bond, giving into the fate of whatever the moon goddess has planned for you. It's tying your souls together so you won't ever be alone again. But when your mate ends up rejecting you, it doesn't just mean rejecting that fate. It also means all your life. You're going to spend it alone. Second chance mates were only for those who had lost their loved one to an unjust death. But at the end of the day, it's the moon goddess who decides who gets what and who gets who. And from that day, I accepted that I wasn't going to get anyone else. I accepted a life without a mate because I already had the greatest gift of all, and that was my son, Elijah. I was content. I didn't really need more. I didn't really need him. Until now. You have to present your mate as a contender. My grandmother's words kept echoing in my ears as I stood there. I knew that was what my father was trying to say too. But it was much more complicated than that. I wish they knew. I wish they knew that I'd tried. Denver wanted nothing to do with me the last time. He'd made it abundantly clear. And I'd spent the past 6 years hating him from afar. There simply had to be another way. But just then, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps drawing close to the door. I charged my eyes up, and in a split second, the locks clicked and the doors opened again. My heart sank in my chest immediately. Shit. Eliana. Shit, I cussed, immediately throwing myself to the ground as I crawled behind the table, making my way into the curtains that split halfway across the room. I was panting heavily from my lips, although I tried my best to be silent. The door was left open for a while. Someone had walked in. My heart pounded against my chest as I clutched my lips with my hands. I heard the sound of approaching footsteps move even closer, and terror creeped into my eyes. I remained as still as a sculpture as a shadow drew across the room, heading toward my father. It was when I peeked a second time that I saw her. Nora? A soft gasp escaped my lips. She walked right to him with her face buried into a book in her hands. But she halted when she got to my dad's table, our dad's table. The thing is, after my mum died, Sienna bore 2 more children for my father. One was Jackson, and the other, about 20 years old now, was Nora. She could be quite invisible in the pack, usually just throwing her complete self into whatever book she was reading at that time. It was all she ever did for the short time I knew her, but she was different now. Her hair was a darker shade of brown, long and fluffy across her shoulders, and she was dressed in an emerald blue gown to suit the theme of the night. I could how much she dreaded it with each step she took. She was quite relieved to be away from the dance floor. But she did more than take a deep breath as soon as the door closed. She halted for a moment as if trying to sniff out a distinct scent in the room. She could sense that someone else was there. Someone close. I wasn't sure how sharp her wolf was, or whether or not she'd even gotten it, but in that moment, I was afraid. I remained as quiet as I could out of fear that she'd be able to sniff me out. Silence ravaged the atmosphere until some footsteps were heard from the room above. Nora resumed whatever she was doing, perhaps admitting that the scent was probably coming from upstairs. I heaved a sigh of relief. She placed the heavy-spined book that she was reading on my father's bedstand, and she pulled out something from her pocket. On her left side, she poured him a glass of water, but in her right hand was a sachet of something. Something powdery that she emptied into my dad's glass. He wasn't looking. His eyes were face down, or maybe he didn't care. Nora was quick, handing him the glass of water and then throwing glances nervously around the room. Here her voice echoed, and she stuffed the glass between his lips, emptying the water down his throat. My father choked for a second, but she helped by patting down his back. Finishing the entire glass was no easy feat, so when she was gone, Nora placed the empty to the table and threw whatever that was in her hands into the trash. She smothered her dress for a second in the mirror before she walked out of the room. As soon as she closed the door, a heavy exhale fled my lips. I didn't notice how much I was holding my breath until she left. So as I climbed from behind the curtain, I panted slowly. The first thing I did was walk up to my dad, and I had to hold his head up because of how terribly sleepy he'd gotten in a matter of seconds. My eyes darted to the glass, and I picked it up. There was something in there, something that she'd given him, and I knew better than to assume it was his medicine because of how suspiciously she threw glances over her shoulder. I walked to the trash and picked up the sachet of whatever she poured into his drink, and my heart stomped with a realization. Could they have been poisoning him all this time? Dad. I grasped his hands, shaking him a little, but his head fell back and his eyes closed. Shit, I cussed, slipping it into my pocket. I was about to get out anyway when my eyes suddenly caught something across the table. It was Nora's book, which she had forgotten behind. My heart seized in my chest as I looked back at the door. Shit. I wasn't quick this time because immediately the doors drew open again. Nora walked in, and her eyes locked into mine. She screamed like she'd seen a ghost while sheer horror plastered across my face. What? What are you doing here? She stuttered, reaching for her phone, but I picked up my pace and brushed past her shoulders. I ran out of the room and down the corridors, heavy breaths echoing from my lips as I grasped the ends of my gown. Nora should have never seen me. If she knew I was back in Oakland, it wouldn't take long until Jackson did too. My heart was pounding and a migraine steered through my head, so the million thoughts that raced through it. But I didn't stop running, in and out the doors, gliding through the bodies across the ballroom floor. Sprinting down the stairs, I weaved through the labyrinthine mass of people, my hair flying behind me like a flag of desperation. I threw several glances back, and one too many times. I swear I saw a flash of Nora's eyes far behind. But yet, it was as if I could feel her breath on my neck. I focused on increasing my speed and getting out of there as fast as I could. Before I came flooding out the front doors, I brought out my phone to dial Adams so he could bring the car up front. But he wasn't picking. Adrenaline burned through my veins as I ran out onto the roads and looking around. He was nowhere to be found. Neither was picking up his phone. I came to a halt for a second, running my hands through my hair. My heart was beating so fast that it could jump out of my throat at any time. The street was dark, even with the lights that dimly shone. It wasn't safe here. Fuck, I cussed. Where the hell was Adams? I threw myself behind nearby shrubs, from where I saw Nora run out the same doors I'd come out from. Panting heavily, she looked around and I could tell she still searched for me, only missing me by a hair's breadth. I watched as she placed her phone against her ears. "You wouldn't believe who I just saw," Nora muttered to whoever was on the other end of the line. But most likely, it was her brother, Jackson. They were usually so close and inseparable. And even though she hated the pack and everything that came with it, she also loved her brother. Some might even say to a fault. So much that she would do anything for him. She could kill for him, which was why it was so terrible that she'd seen me in the first place. I closed my eyes, drawing myself up the shrubs. I couldn't take the road back home. It was too risky. So I stuck to the forest until I was able to get a hold of Adams. I called him again, the umpteenth time that night, but he still didn't pick up. "I'll be waiting for you," he had assured before leaving, and it was unlike him to not keep to his word. A bolt of panic flashed across my face in that second. I kept calling him as I dragged my feet across the earth. It was awfully quiet here. Besides the creaking of the crickets and the birds chirping in the trees, the whistling waves in the nearby river. I walked more and more into the chilly night, folding my arms across my chest. Minutes passed, and then an hour. Maybe 2. I sat down on a rock, resting after walking for so long. I didn't realize how far I was from my pack now, but I could still see the fireworks light the skies from the ball. It was well into midnight, which meant the party was coming to an end, but never before a burst of fireworks would erupt, commemorating that the Alpha had found his bride. I wondered for a moment who the unfortunate woman was and dreaded what life she was about to live. They were celebrating Jackson tonight, and it left a bitter taste in the back of my throat, knowing he'd just moved on with his life after all the terrible things he'd done to me. It rubbed me off the wrong way that he was even celebrated at all. Monsters like him should be exiled and punished for all their wrongdoings, not hailed as the next-in-line alpha. But I get it. Like Nana said, they were all scared of Jackson. And there was a time in my life when I was afraid of him too, more than anything else. But he not only drew the line by trying to take everything that belonged to us, but I pulled out the empty sachet of white powder that Nora had poured into my father's drink. It was possible that all this time it had been them poisoning him. It would make sense as to why no one knew what was wrong with him. But I wondered what Nora stood to gain, as she wasn't even interested in pack hierarchy and titles and all of that. But like I said, she could kill for her brother, and by now it was no question that she'd told him about me. Barely drawn into my thoughts, I noticed something immediately dash across the corner of my eyes. I sprung from the rock, looking tensely over my shoulders. A sharp scent trickled up my nose, one I wasn't quite able to decipher because of how quickly it whistled past. But the air in the forest had suddenly grown tense, and my stomach tied into a knot. I looked around me as the moon cast its ominous glow over the tangled trees. Something in my gut prompted me to immediately start running again, which I did. Slowly, I picked up my pace as adrenaline fired in my heart. Sprinting through the underbrush, I could feel something trailing right behind me. Was it Nora? Did she find me? Was it Jackson? I ran through the woods, my panicked breaths mixing with the haunting howls that echoed through the trees just then. It was a wolf, I realized. And that made me even more scared. As I ran, my heart pounded against my sternum, beating like a drum. None of this would have happened if Adam had picked up his call. Help. I wasn't sure what I was yelling out for, but it was the obvious thing to do. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to be devoured by whatever was behind me. Somebody help! I screamed at the top of my lungs as tears formed in my eyes. One moment when I glanced back, I caught its lucid eyes through my blurry vision, and it all happened so fast. The wolf lunged itself at me, and I tumbled across the earth. I tried to fight it off, kicking and screaming, but its hot, rancid breath seemed to singe the nape of my neck. Twigs snapped and leaves rustled as I came tumbling down. I caught a glimpse of its ferocious eyes, but then I realized we were headed toward the edge of the cliff. No! I scream, trying to maneuver my way around its beastly frame. I closed my eyes as my life flashed behind them. I came really close to falling over, but then I came to a sharp halt, and as soon as I felt a hand wrapped around mine, it hit me. That touch, that sensation buried in the depths of my heart that I hadn't felt since 6 years ago. It hit me like a storm in my face. I was too scared to open my eyes, but I felt my body being lifted up in the air. As soon as my feet grazed the ground, the air was still against my skin, and there was a sharp sting where I'd wounded myself. Finally, I opened my eyes, and his aura enclosed around me like a compelling shell. I heaved a deep breath out of my lips as I turned around. And when our eyes met across the forest, the fireworks hit the skies in that moment, and time itself seemed to pause. A torrent of emotions surged within me. He was human now, breathing heavily from lips as his gaze intensely stared at me. Denver, I called his name softly as tears welled in my eyes. I wasn't sure why they did or whether or not this was even real. He was just standing there, and my heart fluttered in a way that it had never done before. He had changed, but not so much that I wouldn't recognize him. And then finally, he parted his lips to speak. "It's you." His voice thundered with a furrow coming between his brows, and a hard lump slipped down my throat. "It's really you," he echoed. Denver. I couldn't believe she was the one standing in front of me. At the start of the ball, I could swear I caught a glimpse of her and a whiff of her vanilla scent in the air. She captured my attention amidst the tens of thousands of people in the crowd. But I shook my head confidently. It couldn't be her. Perhaps she had been infused deep into my mind, that I was now seeing her where she wasn't, scenting her when she had disappeared for 6 years now. I remember pushing a hard lump down my throat, forcing her out of my head like it was even possible. For the past 6 years, Eliana was all I could about. Some days, I was filled with worry about where she even was. Being a rogue was no easy feat, especially with an Omega like herself. She hadn't been out in the world, and it scared me. On other days, I was filled with regret that the other night ended the way it did, and there was a possibility that I would never see her again. The thing was, I didn't realize how much Eliana did for me until she left. I didn't how deeply I felt for her until the thought of her alone and devastated in the forest drove me mad. For the past 6 years, I blamed myself that something had happened to her. I never forgave myself, and I was filled with this angst and rage all the time because I had let her go. But now, here she was. The winds ran through her long, chestnut hair, her almond-shaped eyes the color of the clearest sapphire which she locked into mine. A thick air of familiarity swept between us in a moment of silence. She looked even more beautiful now, radiating an aura of confidence and elegance, especially in that ballroom gown. It clasped around her slender frame, revealing her curves and graceful features that caught my attention, but it only lasted for so long. Denver, my name escaped her lips softly, like she couldn't believe her eyes too, and a lump slipped down my throat yet again. "It's you." It dawned on me. I wasn't wrong earlier, that whiff of vanilla scent in the air at the start of the night. I could never mistake her for someone else. "It's really you," I muttered, but she blinked her eyes away, a light scoff suddenly escaping her lips. She grasped the ends of her dirt-smudged gown as she turned around. Immediately, I went after. "Eliana," I called, but she didn't stop stomping away. It wasn't until I grasped her wrist that she came to a halt. "I can't do this." She shook her head. She faced me, and an arch came between my eyes. They fell upon her porcelain skin, although had mud across her cheeks, were still ever radiant and flawless. Her lips were a delicate shade of rose, both inviting and enigmatic, and I had to draw myself out of my carnal thoughts immediately. Was she always this attractive and irresistible? It was almost as if now she'd cast a spell on me, and I was compelled to see her, to truly see Eliana Jacobs. And if I had never felt regret before, I did in that moment. She withdrew her hands from me, and I took a step back. "What are you doing here?" I asked her softly, and she scoffed. Like her cheeks didn't light up with fire inside of them, she turned away. "Eliana." "Don't call my name," she gritted through her teeth. "God, I never wanted to see you, Denver." She ran her hands through her hair, and I hummed. I can understand that I replied, because if anything, how we left things off that night had stuck with me ever since. I wished constantly that things went differently, and I should tell her. But I could feel the resentment in her eyes as she looked at me. I can't blame her, though. But at the same time, I couldn't just sit back and watch her walk away. She turned her back and started walking in the opposite direction, leaving me to catch up to her pace. "Where are you going?" I asked. "It's none of your business," she snapped. "Not after you nearly killed me." Her arms wrapped around each other, and I stuttered. "I didn't mean to, I didn't think it was you." She darted a look at me. "Yes, you did," she said. "You've been stalking me ever since I came back. You think I didn't see the other day in the forest?" She raised her voice, sending an echo through the trees, and my eyes genuinely went blank. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I replied, but she blew raspberry in my face. "So typical," she murmured. "I'm serious," I trailed behind her. "I didn't even know you came back. I only just saw you tonight," I added. "Well, can we act like that never happened?" She stopped in her tracks again, and this time there was a rumble in the skies above us. The winds hauled right past and a drizzle started to pour. "Where are you going now?" I asked her. She crossed her arms. "What do you want from me, Denver?" she asked. "You. I wanted you," I could have said, but I rather keep silent. "You were wandering the forest alone at midnight. You have no idea how unsafe it is that you're out here, especially on a night like this. It shouldn't be an argument, but I raised my voice. Why was I so suddenly concerned about her safety? Why do you care? Her question slapped me in the face, and I gulped down a hard lump. It's my arms fell beside me. It's the moonlight ball. All the wolves are probably drunk and horny and willing to take on anything they set their sights on. It isn't safe here. I tried to reach for her hands, but she threw me off. "Leave me alone, Denver," she yelled. "Now, you suddenly care about me. Where was that part of you 6 years ago, huh?" she asked. "Not wanting to get hauled by a pack of wolves is common human decency," I muttered, and she scoffed yet again. "There he is," she heaved. "The cocky and arrogant Alpha Denver. I was wondering when the facade would wear off. It was quite boring thinking you'd changed," she muttered. My hands fell to my hips. "I'm not the man I used to be 6 years ago," I answered her. And although the rain picked up, it wasn't so much to get either of us drenched. But we should probably have been on our way to the car or something. Eliana was just being as stubborn as usual. "Wow," she clapped. "Well, that's good for you. And what's her name, Claire?" Her voice went high-pitched, and there was a crack in it. I heaved a deep breath as soon as I realized. "Is that what this about, Claire?" I asked. "No, Denver." "Did it ever occur to you for once how much you broke me 6 years ago? And I'm not just talking about my heart because falling for you was a mistake, and it was my mistake, but you absolutely shattered me. And I can say that now, but for all those years, it was difficult for me. And you have no fucking idea, so you can't just walk up to me and make conversation like we're friends, or like we owe each other something." "Okay, Denver? But you are right about one thing," though she paused. "I'm not the same person I used to be 6 years ago, too. So none of that is going to work this time." She turned her around, and almost immediately, the rain picked up its momentum. a bolt of lightning striking the earth, and an ear-splitting thunder right after. She halted, and we both got drenched in the middle of the forest. "You don't have to back," I yelled. She turned back at me, furious at her lack of options. "I have a car nearby. I can drive you home," I offered. I could almost the cuss words yelp out of her lips as she grudgingly brushed past my shoulders. "I'll be quiet." "Yeah," I picked up after her. Barely a 5-minute walk. We reached my car, and she sat in the passenger seat with her arms across her chest. She was shivering. Here I wound up the windows, handing her a leather coat I had in the back seat. But she didn't utter a word. Neither did she look in my direction. The rain continued to beat down upon my windshield, and I started the engine, at least to get out of the forest. I kept the coat right beside her, if ever she changed her mind, but she didn't. As I reversed out of there, I stole quick glances at her emotionless face, and her voice kept echoing in my ears. The car was dreadfully silent until I spoke up. "Eliana." My voice filled the vehicle. It was harder for her to act like she didn't care. "I wish that night ended differently." She slowly turned her face to me. "All the time," I added. Her lips were harshly poured before she turned to face the windows again. A smirk crippled the corner of my lips for a sec. "I heard about your father." Desperate to break the silence, I said. "We're not friends, Denver," she finally replied, pulling out her phone, and it was like she was dialing someone. Her face couldn't hide the panic when the person didn't pick up, and she slouched back into the chair. "I lost mine, you know," I blurred out, and the thought of my dead father left a sour taste in the back of my throat. At least, Eliana knew him, and he knew her. For so long after she left, he never gave me a break. Not that I deserved it. I'm so sorry." Her empathy won her over as she whispered, and I shrugged my shoulders. "It's been a while now, you know. Just wanted you to know," because my voice died into a whisper, and she fell quiet. "Is that why you're here? Your father?" I asked, and Eliana heaved a deep breath. The answer was crystal clear in her eyes. "Oh," I whispered. "Well, if you ever need anything..." She picked up her phone again, desperately trying to get a hold of the other person. The first thing that passed through my mind was that it was her boyfriend. Or perhaps Eliana was married now. My heart sank at the possibility, but it had been 6 years. Surely, she'd been with someone other than me, and a hard knot formed in my stomach as I looked down at her fingers. Luckily, there was no ring. No husband. It was as though she caught my eye, and Eliana immediately looked at me. She lifted her gaze in a way that fixed into mine, and a tender feeling swept through the air between us. I took her hands in mine, and there was a spark of electricity where our skins touched. "If you ever need anything, I'm right here." Panic flashed in her eyes as she quickly pulled away from me, and she screamed, "Watch out." I turned my eyes back to the road, and it was nearly too late. My tires came to a screeching halt against the wet road, and my mouth gaped at what was before me. "Oh my God," Eliana gasped, immediately throwing herself out of the car. "It's Adam," she yelled, and there was a crack in her voice. I alighted too, letting my eyes fall on the brutally injured young man who immediately fell to the ground before us. He could only carry himself much further, and by the looks of viciously mauled wounds, the odds were already against him. He gasped for air until he breathed his last in Eliana's hands. She held him up. "No!" she screamed. "No! No! Call for help." She was terribly shaken up, holding steadfastly around his dismembered limbs and arms. I'd never seen an attack like this cruel, but then again, it was the moonlight ball. "Call for help, Denver." "He's gone," I whispered beneath my breath, although she didn't want to accept it. I had to tear her body away from his and hold onto her. Eliana was in tears as she looked down at him. It wasn't so unusual for the ball night to end in tragedy. Neither would it be the first time. But deep down, I knew this was different. I threw a look back at the forest, because whoever did this was still out there. Eliana. Grief came in the morning. The sun was barely out, and gloom hung above like clouds of darkness. The air was humid with a little moisture in the atmosphere from last night's rain. I leaned against the car, praying and hoping it was all a dream, but alas, it wasn't. It happened, holding Adam's lifeless body in my hands, or what was left of it that happened. The bloody gore, the million thoughts racing through my mind. You have to call for help, Denver. I remembered chanting, and my voice echoed back to me the next morning like a hangover. Call someone. It's over, he's gone. Denver had replied as the rain beat into us, carrying the flood that flowed from Adam's mauled body down the road. I had never seen anything quite like it. My first initial thought was that an animal did it, but the bites into his neck narrowed it down to a wolf. But from the looks of it, it was not an ordinary wolf. That image kept on replaying in my head over and over through the night. I hadn't slept. My eyelids were charged open so much I doubted they could close now. The wind swept through my hair as I folded my arms. The chirping of the morning birds was what drifted me out of my thoughts. I wish it were a normal morning. I wish the air wasn't so thick with grief and the strong scent of death. My eyes were so sore, and so was the back of my throat. The sirens of both the police and ambulance cars blared in the background, and soon, Denver walked up to me. Here. My eyes fell to the bottle of water he held out in his hands. Have something to drink, he urged. I lifted my gaze to him, and it was quite unbelievable. Have something to drink? I echoed. Adams is dead, Denver. And whatever killed him is still out there, I muttered. So no, I won't have something to fucking drink. Not unless I have some answers, Mom. Can you calm down? A uniformed police officer echoed from behind, and I darted him a cold glare. What you won't do is tell me to calm down. I shook my head. But Denver held me back with his hand. We're doing the best we can, the officer added. You can leave now, Denver ordered him. I can handle it from here. His voice was deep and his tone was authoritative. Without wasting a second, the officer pulled away. There were several of them, half even coming from the town. The thing was Adam's body was found on Tombsdale grounds, barely meters away from the bordering line between Oakland and Tombsdale in the forest. So by law, the officers had to be called, especially when it was something as serious as a murder. Or even worse, dismemberment. Each time the image flashed behind my eyes, I would jerk forward and close them, like it did in that moment, but tears started to fall down my cheeks instead. Denver didn't let go of my hands. You have to drink something, he insisted. I shook my head. You don't understand, there was a crack in my voice. Adams and I came here together, I whispered. He was supposed to be in his car. He was supposed to wait for me and take me back home. We were together. We came together. Denver, and now, not only was he killed, but his whole body. I paused, breaking down into tears. It doesn't even look like him anymore. I cried. The police are doing everything they can. It's a waste of time, because it was clearly not a human that did that to him. I'm not even sure it's a wolf. The marks, the wounds, were like that of a beast, Denver. Look, Sheriff Lance is the one handling the case. Denver lowered his voice. He's a close friend of mine, and he knows just as much as you do about werewolves and all that shit. If someone can get to the root of this, I'm certain that it's him, he muttered. And I wasn't even surprised. There were many more humans in Tombsdale than there were in Oakland. I had heard something of a century-old truce between the police and Blood Moon Pack, who had been here since the beginning of time. Even the Force had some shifters. Their superhuman strength and speed were something that always came in handy. But only a few of them knew about us. Never the civilians, though. It had been forged into the depths of our minds since the day we were born never to disclose our secret. The last something like that happened, It resulted in the Cold War, a ghastly tragedy that ended up taking so many lives. It was one of the reasons I kept my identity a secret in Tuscany, which on some days was harder than I thought. But it was a price I paid for being the way I was. I don't know. Denver terror broke my voice as he hung his jacket around my shoulders. I leaned against him, a few more tears streaming down my cheeks and his hands smothered along my back. "It's going to be okay," he assured, although that was clearly a lie. My gut feeling had ruptured because whatever did this to Adam, it wouldn't take long until it found another victim. "Denver," Lance called him, and he had to pull away. For a moment, he was flustered with the officers until he walked back to me. I stepped forward, clutching my bag underneath my arms. "I need to get back home," I muttered. "Oh, my grandma. What do I tell her?" Panic subdued my eyes when Denver roped me back. "What do I tell the rest of the pack?" "I mean, I have to warn them, Eliana." Denver interrupted, and he held firm to my hands. "I don't think it's a good idea that you go home now," he added, and I furrowed my brows. "Excuse me?" Letting go of his hands, I asked. "It won't be such a bad idea if you stayed here. At least until we're sure of whatever is out there and we catch it." He stuttered, and I shook my head in disbelief. "I'm not staying here." "Look, it's not safe," he insisted, but I raised my voice. "I'm not staying here, Denver." "I have to go back," I argued, and there was a twisted feeling of déjà vu that left me gutted. The past wasn't about to repeat itself. I was going back to my pack, and whatever happened on the way. I'll face it. After everything that happened, I didn't want to spend another second away from Elijah and my Nana. It was like it finally dawned on me how ugly things could get here. Maybe I had forgotten, but Adams was proof. I had no idea what I'd walked into, but it was too late to turn back around now. "Eliana." Denver stepped in front of me as I was about to leave, and a hard lump went down his throat. "At least, let me drive you home." He held out his keys, and I grudgingly obliged. I walked back into his car, and again, Denver sauntered first to the police, muttering only God knew what, and for a moment, I arched my brows. There was something off about him since last night that I couldn't quite put a finger on, like he knew something. I saw it in his face as he walked back into the car. I mean, he was always so enigmatic and mysterious, but this time was different. I could almost see through him for a change. He started the car and pulled away. We were set on the highway, a route about half an hour from my pack now. And most of that time was spent in dreaded silence. We both had a lot of things that raced through our minds. I, for one, had bloodstain and mud across my torn dress, and my mind was still blurred from last night's trauma. There were times that I could feel my heart rate suddenly skyrocketing and my palms would go all sweaty. The image was all I could think about, scarred deep into my memory. We'd left here together, but I was coming back alone. "One more thing," Eliana Denver's voice broke the silence, and I threw a look over my shoulder at him. "Can you not tell anyone about what happened, at least not yet?" he said, and a scoff escaped my lips. "You want me to keep it a secret?" I asked. "The police are already doing what they can. Telling people would draw unnecessary attention to the case. It's not about telling people. It's about warning them, because whatever did this is still out," I yelled. "I know," he muttered. "No," I shook my head. "No, you don't know. You're the one who lost a pack member," I said. "And do you have any idea what's going to happen when your pack finds out that one of them died on my land?" he asked. "Is that what this is about? For so long, I've avoided a war between both our packs. That isn't going to change now." Denver seared through his teeth. "Maybe there should be a war. Maybe we should march through the forest and fish out the creature that did this ourselves." "I can't believe you're asking this of me, Denver." "I wouldn't be if it wasn't important." "Well, I don't owe you anything," I spat. "Like I said, we aren't friends," I added. Denver looked at me daringly, and I could see through his facade. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why are you making me out to be the enemy?" I blurred out a chuckle. "Maybe you are." All the tension and emotions overwhelmed me in a split second. "Maybe you're the enemy, Denver. We were the only ones in that part of the forest last night, and it was raining heavily. I don't think anyone else left the party at that time." I gritted through my teeth, and he was taken aback by my words. "Eliana," there was a crack in his voice. "Are you trying to say that I did this, that I killed Adams?" he asked. "I'm trying to find out what exactly it is that you're hiding because I know there's something." "Denver, you saw Adams. You saw what happened to him. It could have been anyone," he replied, but I shook my head. "Not any fucking wolf can do that," I screamed at him as my heart raced in my chest. After a moment, my voice went low. "Only one strong and ruthless enough can do that to another," I said, and an emotion sliced through his face. Denver's lips parted, but he didn't say anything. The car came to a halt. Only then did I realize what I'd just accused him of, and there was a searing silence in the car between us. I couldn't even look at him, and he himself looked away from me. I wiped my tears. It was only getting to me. The memories of last night flooded back into my mind. He was supposed to wait for me. Denver's fingers crawled to the locks, and he opened the car doors. "I think it's best if we just stay away from each other for now," I muttered beneath my breath, a sniffle running through my nose. "You stay on your end, and I stay on mine. We don't ever have to cross paths again," I said. Of course, after everything that happened, there was no use pretending that they didn't anymore. Even though 6 years was a long time ago from now, some wounds had been reopened, ones that never fully healed, and I'd only just gotten back into town. This was why I didn't want to see him. I alighted from the car, slamming the door behind me, and Denver didn't say a word. He only zoomed off after a while, leaving me by the side of the road. Luckily, Nana's cabin wasn't so far off from here. A few more steps and I'd already reached the wooden portico. I climbed my way to the door, but before I opened it, I leaned forward and broke down into tears. My heart was heavy with all the grief that I carried. The fresh ones had rehashed the old ones, and it had exploded in my chest. I just couldn't face Denver again. I'm not sure I ever will. Denver. I drove the car back to my pack before coming to an abrupt halt. Pushing the door open, I stormed out of the vehicle and headed straight toward the chamber. My heart was pounding with a fiery rage, and my footsteps were heavy enough to crush the dry, crisp leaves beneath my boots. I flung the front door open, and the metal clang echoed the fury in my soul. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as Eliana's voice kept replaying in my head. "Maybe you're the enemy, Denver." Her words stung like an open wound. "I think it's better we just stay away from each other. You stay on your end, and I stay on mine. We don't ever have to cross paths again." How could she think I was the one who killed Adam? Did she not have the slightest idea of who I was? Was I that ruthless and monstrous to her that she thought I would do such a thing? The betrayal sliced through my heart, although I wasn't sure entirely why. I was never one to be moved by what anyone thought about me, but ever since Eliana walked back into my life, I just seemed different. Like I wanted to be different even more from the man I was 6 years ago. So hearing those words from her lips, that accusation, the betrayal and disappointment was unforgivable. My steps grew more forceful as I approached the chamber doors, muttering curses beneath my breath. I didn't kill Adam, and I would do everything I can to prove it. I pushed the door open, and the whole room died in silence once I stepped in. My vision cleared as my eyes landed on Sheriff Lance, and right beside him was Corey, one of my most trusted betas and my right-hand man. Judging by the searing looks on both their faces, I could tell something was wrong. "What happened?" Corey stepped forward, telling the same. "You wouldn't believe that Eliana thinks I killed Adam," I scoffed, running my hands through my hair. But I caught a suspicious glance that he exchanged with the sheriff, and then I exhaled. "Please don't tell me you think that bullshit too," I cussed. "Actually, I do not." Sheriff Lance cleared his throat before throwing a file of documents to the table in front of me. I darted my eyes back and forth with a sense of intrigue, and when I looked back at Corey, he nodded. I reached for the papers, which on closer look only appeared to be very graphic pictures of someone decapitated or another, with their organs spewing out of their stomach. One thing all 5 photos had in common, besides their unrecognizability, was the amount of blood and gore. Now, I couldn't do that. Not to Adam, nor to these people. Do you know these people? What happened to them? The sheriff folded his arms with a brow perched up, and I scoffed again. "I don't even know who they are," I replied. There was a brief pause before he hummed. "There have been 5 bodies, Adam's being the 5th in the past week." Lance started and my lips fell slightly open. "Look at them. All 5 of them have been gruesomely murdered by what witnesses and citizens are calling a wild beast. An animal mine has seen before," he continued, and I closed my eyes to flashes of Adam's body. The first time I laid eyes on him in Eliana's arms. Those deep claw marks scarred into his skin, and the sight of his limbs barely hanging by a thread. I looked back at the other 4 photos, and they were just like him. Maybe a wild beast was roaming the forest, or it was something worse. Something I'd never seen before. Something stronger. A hard lump formed in the back of my throat. 4 of them were civilians, and there are already a bunch of agencies looking into their murder. "Well, they won't find anything." "Nothing from us," I interrupted Lance. "I can't assure you anymore," he replied. Dumping the photos to the table, I squared up his gaze with a colder one. "What are you saying?" I gritted. "I'm saying 1-2 deaths could be ruled as a coincidence, but when 5 people die in the most grueling way possible and in just 1 week, it raises a lot of questions and attention. And I'm not sure how long until your secret gets." I dashed my way toward him in a split second with my hands around his neck and his body against the wall. "I'll tell you what you won't do, which is let my secret come out. Don't let me remind you of the deal we made." I seared through my teeth, fire igniting in my eyes, and my claws already digging through my skin. "Denver." Sheriff Lance fell to the ground to catch his breath, and I turned away. "This is the last thing we should be doing now," Corey muttered. "The last thing you should be doing is killing innocent civilians. I have a pact with my people first before yours, and if you go ahead killing them, I'm not sure they would even be any." The sheriff reached for his papers. "Denver didn't do this." Corey stepped forward. "Why did everything think I had something to do with this? I may not have a stellar peacemaker reputation, but it didn't make me into a wild beast capable of killing innocent people." "I'm not saying he did." Lance paused. "I'm saying one of you did it, and you better find out that person before there's another murder," he added. "It could be the bloodhounds, you know." Corey looked at me for a second. "A bloodhound killing one of their own?" Lance shook his head. "I don't think so. It would be pretty stupid for one of mine to kill one of them too, you know. Not after what happened the last time," I said. "We have strict rules and laws here." Lance only halted when he got close to me and his hands soothed around his bruised neck. "Maybe we're dealing with a rogue, one who doesn't follow rules," he said before walking out of the room, and my eyes immediately darted to Corey's, whose were immediately filled with worry. "It doesn't make sense." My arms fell to the table. "Which one of us would be stupid enough to attack a bloodhound?" As I asked, I could feel the rage pulse through my veins. Because if I found out it was one of us, then there would be a 6th murder. "Lance seems pretty mad." Corey paused. "You too. You said Eliana thought it was you who did it?" he asked, and with my fingers between my teeth, I nodded. "Can you believe that?" It was a rhetorical question, but Corey ended up answering. "I couldn't 100% blame her," he replied, striking the air with his hands. "Please don't throw me against the wall," he remarked. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "Speak," I ordered nonetheless. "Eliana left 6 years ago, and honestly, you weren't the best person 6 years ago. You were a ruthless, and most of them. Stoic, it didn't mean I was a killer then. And most especially, not now," I interrupted. "The scores of people under your belt say otherwise," Corey muttered. "You know I'm the man I used to be 6 years ago." My voice went low for a moment, and Corey stepped forward. "You see now, I do. But I'm not sure Eliana does. I think she still knows you for who you were before, and it won't be as easy trying to convince her that you've changed," he said. "It will when I convince her that I didn't do this, at least," I said, brushing past his shoulders. "Why does it even matter anyway?" His question made me stop in my tracks, and I looked back at him. "What she thinks," he added, and I blanked out for a second. "She was my wife," was Corey echoed. "Yes, was. Eliana was my wife, who I should have never let go of." And then suddenly, Corey's eyes grew wide with an idea. "I know that look." I sauntered closer to him. "What if these murders have nothing to do with us? What if there's some sort of message to Eliana herself?" he asked. "I mean, she only just came back to town after 6 years, and then one of her people suddenly gets murdered. 4 more in the last week. When was the last time anyone got murdered in Oakland?" Corey asked, and there was some truth in his words. "You may be onto something," I replied. "I don't think Eliana's safe on the verge of turning around." Corey immediately held me back. "The question right now is who would want to pass a message to Eliana, well aware that one way or another we would be involved?" Corey narrowed his eyes, and he pulled out of his pocket a picture of Adam that was taken by Lance. "Look at this, Denver." He spelled it out, and my heart suddenly thumped in my chest. Lance said it himself. This is something he has never seen before, but it's something we have. "It's not possible," I blurted out. "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" "It's him, Denver. Look at these bodies. Only he could do this. Could devour flesh and eat to the bones. These bodies are drained of blood, and for the last 5 years, when was the last time any of us had a kill?" Corey questioned, and I felt fire around my chest at that moment. "But he's been gone. He's been gone for so long," I whispered. "Well, I think he's back." Corey pressed his lips tight. "I think Blake is back." The news has barely sunk in when I suddenly felt a rupture in my heart. I fell backward with a thud, and Corey had to hold me up. "What is it?" he asked. I lifted my gaze to him because that wasn't the first time that happened. "It's Eliana," I panted. "I think she might be in danger." It was like a gut feeling, but more intense and tethered. I felt it for the first time last time, and it was how I knew she attended the moonlight ball. How I knew to show up. My body almost couldn't resist the urge to fight back at the thought of Eliana being in danger. But this wasn't like last night. I could hear her shallow screams from a distance even, and I thrusted myself outside the door. "Denver!" Corey called as my hands fell to my knees. My breathing grew labored and intense, and for a moment it felt like my lungs started to close. My body convulsed, and immediately I raised my face to the skies. I let rage fill them. The monster surged inside of me as my bones started to crack beneath my skin. My spine arched, my teeth elongated into carnivorous fangs, and the fur growing out of my skin etched my entire body with a burning pain. As my hands detached from my knees, the man was no more. I now stood tall with a thunderous howl that escaped my lips. I looked back at Corey, whose eyes widened in awe, and without saying anything else, I surged forward, through the trees, and headed back to Eliana. She was in danger. And if truly this was Blake, I couldn't wait to rip my brother's heart out of his chest, once and for all. Eliana. Adam. The sound of my grandmother's voice drifted me out of my thoughts, and as I raised my eyes to meet hers, she tried to sit up. "Where is Adam?" she asked again, as if I hadn't heard her the first time. I did. Getting the words out of my lips was just the difficult part. My throat was dry and sour, with a hard lump throbbing inside of it. I reached for her tender hands, and just as I was about to speak, the door opened. I turned my eyes to Ivan, one of the pack nurses who usually stopped by to give Nana her medicines. Immediately, the door opened. A burst of sunlight filled the room. "You didn't come home last night," she yawned. Ivan walked up to her bedside, took her temperature, and dished out about 3 different colored pills. He also brought her a plate of porridge to go with. Nana loved oatmeal and porridge. They were her favorite meal. We all had one in the pack. Ever since we were little, my father trained us to be satisfied and content with natural foods, rather than fall prey to our instincts and primal desires to kill. It taught us the self-control that made us different from all the other packs. But what would all that matter if Jackson ends up alpha? All of that would go down the drain. He was one of few who went behind father's back and still fed on wild animals, still drank until he no longer knew his name, and then all those years, in the peak of the night, he'd stumble into the dungeon where I laid and force me to stay with him. I shut my eyes at the painful memories that seared behind them, and I pushed a hard lump down my throat. Jackson was a monster. I couldn't even imagine how much worse he'd have gotten over the last 6 years. It was the reason I was scared that Nora would tell him that she saw me the night of the moonlight ball. I was scared because I had no idea what he would do. As if that wasn't enough worry, there was also Adam. And the whole ordeal with Denver. I wanted to believe that this wasn't him, but he also wasn't the calmest 6 years ago. For the months I stayed with him, I watched him slay his enemies without wasting a second. But although he ruled with an iron fist, I knew how much he still loved his pack, and that he never for once killed an innocent person. Adam was innocent. It couldn't be Denver. "Eliana," my grandmother called my name, and I batted my lashes back at her. "Where did you go?" she asked softly. A scoff escaped my lips. "I saw your eyes zone out from here. You know you used to do that a lot as a kid." She beamed a gentle smile, and I just exhaled from my lips. "What is it? What is the problem?" "You know you can always tell me," she whispered. How could I tell her what had become of Adam? That not only was he killed last night, but his limbs were drawn out of his body. The flashes from last night made my stomach tie in a knot. "Is this about Adam?" she asked. But my eyes shifted to Ivan. He was about to leave with his bags when I sharply got up. "I'll be right back, Nana," I muttered, catching up to him. I did remember her saying he was the only other person I could trust. And since Adam wasn't here, he was also the only other person that could help me. I dipped my hands into my pocket and pulled out the plastic bag from it. It contained a powder that Nora had poured into my father's drink last night. I was able to get a hold of this before I left. "Can you do me a favor?" I asked. When he turned around, there was an arch between his brows. His eyes fell to what was in my hands. "Can you have this tested for me?" I ran my hands through my hair. "Tested for what?" Ivan asked. I cleared my throat. I think it might be poison or something, but I'm not sure. It's really urgent that I get it tested. "Please," I bickered. Only after a minute of hesitation did he reach to collect the bag, and a sigh escaped my lips. "Thank you," I heaved. "And one more thing." I stopped him in his tracks yet again. "Could you not tell anyone that I'm here?" I whispered. "I already promised your grandma," he replied. "No, it's different now. Jackson might already know I'm in town. I just need to buy some more time." Ivan looked to the ground before he nodded. "Yeah, sure. I won't tell anyone," he said. "Thanks," I whispered softly, running my hands through my hair as the doors closed. I heaved in a deep breath through my lips, and it wasn't up to a second later that I heard a voice call from behind. "Mommy." It was Elijah. I turned to find him at the apex of the stairs, and I watched him scurry down. "Careful," I exclaim, ultimately catching him in my arms, and he jumped on me. Nana chuckled from a distance, and when I lifted my eyes to her, she said, "He was waiting for you last night." I held tighter around him. "Is that true?" My voice cracked as tears welled up in my eyes. I hadn't been away from my son for that long, at least never a whole night. So it dawned on me how this was perhaps my new reality. Even with what happened last night, there was just this profound gratitude that I got to hold him again. Knowing he was safe was everything I needed. Are you okay, Mummy?" Elijah pulled away slowly, and his hands attempted to wipe my tears. "I am now," I sniffled into my arms, drawing him closer to Nan's. She read me a bedtime story, so I was able to fall asleep. He chanted, and I smiled at her. "Thank you," I mouthed. "Yay, porridge?" His eyes fell into her plate, and I had to hold him back. "That's for Grandma," I cautioned. "Silly," she refuted, already drawing him close for a spoon. I had to stand to get out of the way, but before I could leave, Grandma's hands fell into mine. "But really," she paused, "are you okay?" Already sensing that something not so good happened last night, she asked again. I just pressed my lips together with a light scoff. It was only a matter of time before she knew anyway. "Go get some rest. I'll take care of him." She let go of my hands, and I flashed a meek smile. "Thanks," I replied before walking up the stairs and into the room on the other end of the cabin. I fell into bed in no time, and somehow, even with everything going on, I was able to fall asleep. And the next time my eyes shot open, it was to sheer darkness creeping into the room. Looking around, I sat up with my back against the wall and couldn't shake some sort of eerie tension that filled the air. "Grandma?" I called out, only for the walls to return an echo. There was a distant creaking sound that immediately caused my heart to race. Something was off. Something was wrong. Someone was here. "Hello," I raised my voice, climbing out of bed and reaching for a bat across the nightstand. A cold sweat trickled down my face, and I tried my best to be as quiet after that. I could smell the danger in the air, as much as I could smell someone else. Someone cold and dark, whose presence haunted the room, and at that moment, all I needed to know was that Elijah was okay. I stepped out of the room as quietly as I could, walking across the corridor. The walls were bathed in a sinister, silvery moonlight that cast long, eerie shadows. My footsteps creaked against the wooden floors as I inched closer to the room, and alas, when I pushed his door, there he was, laying peacefully, although I was rather quick to heave a sigh of relief. Because at that moment, a soft, ominous scrape against the floor drew my attention, and I knew someone was behind me. Far before I cast my eyes on a dark figure in the corner. Oh my God, my breath got caught in my throat as I fell backward. I recognized him from that moment in the forest when I'd barely arrived in Oakland. This was the same person, or judging from its silvery eyes and glistening ivory teeth, the same thing. "What do you want?" I called out with the bat defensively in front of me. There was a crack in my voice as I tirelessly stepped in front of Elijah to protect him. "What do you want from me?" I yelled again, and this time there was a scowling growl that filled the room. "I'll put that away if I were you." The voice stomped my heart and my pulse quickened as I placed my hands in my pocket. A desperate attempt to reach for my phone and call Denver at least. But I wasn't quick enough because in the flash of a second, the figure appeared right in of me, darting the bat out of my hands as well as the phone. His hands grasped around my neck, and he lifted my feet off the floor. His claws dug into my skin with malice as I shriveled. "Please," I blurted out in fear. "Please." "You have the wrong person." His eyes were so stoic and emotionless, and even though I couldn't make out his entire face, I knew it wasn't Jackson. He wasn't as tall, and neither was he as strong. I said, "Put that away." The voice growled again, and I raised my hands in the air as if my throat wasn't closing up. My vision started to daze a second later as he constricted my airways. I knew I didn't have much time, and he didn't exactly want me dead. We'd been through this in the commune where I trained as a warrior. So I did the one thing that could set me free, which was summon the last of my strengths to kick him in the shin. His grip around my neck immediately fell, and it was just enough time for me to escape. I clung to the windows, fighting to keep it open as I threw myself out, at least taking him further away from where Elijah was. My knees grazed against the ground as I thrusted myself forward. But he was faster. In a second, I felt him behind me and his hand clamped over my mouth to stifle my screams. It was then I noticed for the first time how abnormally large they were and furry. This wasn't just anyone, it was a wolf. Don't you dare try to run away from me. His voice was a chilling whisper, carried by the eerie winds. I trembled in his arms as he held me closer to him, this time his claws digging into my skin until I started to bleed out. Terror flashed in my eyes as I struggled to break free. But my chances weren't looking good. All I wanted in that moment was to see my son, Elijah, if it was for one last time. But just when I thought it was the end, there was a bull that echoed in the skies, and immediately he looked back. Someone pounced on him, tearing him to the ground. I fell forward too, gasping for breath and in search of a shed. Now, I could see him clearer in the moonlight, the man that held me. He had raven black hair and a very sculpted face. His eyes, sharp and colorless, like glacial ice, immediately found me as he struggled to stand to his feet. But there was someone else. My eyes dilated and a wave of relief washed across my face. Denver? I called his name as he came to light. Now faced with the man who'd harmed me, his fist started to fold up. "How dare you?" he growled, and I knew that look in his eyes. "Denver!" I threw myself forward, but he held me behind him. "Stay there," he ordered. "Relax," the other cooed. "It's merely a family reunion." An arch came between my brows as I reached for Denver's arm. "Family?" I echoed. His eyes met my terror-filled ones. I said, "Stay there. Isn't this the part where you introduce me, brother?" My jaw dropped at the revelation. He now faced Blake squarely, who struck out his clawed hand. "No," he gritted through his teeth. "This is the part where I kill you. Eliana. This is the part where I kill you." At the sound of Denver's deep voice, there was a rumble in the skies. The air was charged with tension just as he swung across to where the other was. "Blake," he'd said. That was his name. Up until this moment, I didn't even know Denver had a brother. Throughout my stay in Black Mountain, I didn't see him once, and neither did I hear that name, which could only mean that they weren't so close. But watching them tear each other apart wasn't even on my bingo card. Denver had transformed in a split second. So did Blake. And as soon as the moonlight bathed across their furry skin, the ominous growls of the two wolves reverberated through the night. My eyes charged open, but I didn't leave the shed where Denver had told me to stay. He lunged himself at Blake, slashing across his face with sharp claws. His arms clamped around his neck as Denver aimed to sink his razor-sharp fangs into his brother. But the other, a silver-furred werewolf, a darker shade than his brother's. He evaded the attack with a sidestep and drew Denver to the ground instead. There was a loud thump, and my heart sank in my chest. Denver arose a second later. The two of them bled. "What are you doing here?" he growled. "God forbid I decide to show up for my family," Blake spat. "Bullshit," Denver cussed. "Why did you kill him?" They circled each other with their intense gaze buried into each other's eyes. Blake attacked next without saying a word. With his eyes burning with fury, he tried to tear Denver to the ground once again. But he was quicker this time, defending himself by propelling the other like the missile. With a guttural growl, Denver reached for Blake and snapped his jaw. The fight raged on even as their blood spilled across the ground and cries of agony mixed with jarring animal noises. I clamped my hands over my mouth, forcing myself to stay still like Denver had instructed, rather than plunging myself between them. I put two and two together and realized Blake might have been the one who killed Adam. I didn't even know him. There was no telling what more he was capable of. At that moment, I began to worry about Denver. I thought he'd be able to fight him off, but Blake was no easy feat. It was almost like Denver himself wasn't as strong. It didn't make sense because I'd almost never seen him bleed the way he was right now. He fell to the ground with a thud, and his eyes glistened as he lifted his gaze up. He was weak, and Blake wasted no time in pouncing on him. With his elbow against his neck, he made sure Denver wasn't able to stand so easily as he kept striking him. He howled in pain as Blake's claws raked across his chest, and then his eyes locked into mine from a distance. He shook his head, but I knew exactly what I was meant to do. I sprang forth from the bushes and instinctively leaped onto Blake's back. He struggled to fight me off, but not before my fingers made it into his eyes and he screeched. Denver made it out from beneath him, but in a fit of rage, Blake shoved me off from his shoulders. I flew into the dusty ground, coughing out blood, and the leaves and dirt kicked up in his wake, adding to the chaos. For a moment, I couldn't see, although I heard an even louder groan echo in the blur. Alas, when I stood and was finally able to see, my eyes only rested on Denver. "He's gone," I whispered, looking around. Denver was holding a bloody stick in his hands. I was able to get him, though he seared through his teeth, panting heavily from his lips. But he's gone now bravely. Relief washed across my face. I wondered why it didn't on Denver's, but that was before he shook his head. "It doesn't matter." His voice was deep and decadent. "He's going to come back." Bloodlust filled his eyes. "He's always going to come back," gritting through his teeth. Denver then looked at me. "Do you believe now that I wasn't the one who killed Adam?" he asked. It was like my tongue got caught up in my throat. Nursing his wounds, Denver sat on the cabin's front porch. I walked out with even more ice after first confirming that Elijah was okay. He was, in fact, still tucked up in bed. One of the few upsides that he was a heavy sleeper. The night was at its peak, and I highly doubted that I could sleep. So I retired right next to him, handing over the ice. He grudgingly collected it from my hands and barely darted me an eye. "How was I supposed to know?" I asked. "You never mentioned you had a brother." Only then did he look up at me. "Well, if you weren't so busy accusing me of being a murderous monster and shunning me whenever I tried speaking, maybe we could have had a conversation," he hissed. "I'm not just talking about now." I rolled my eyes. 6 years ago, you mentioned nothing of your brother, and we were supposed to be married. So whose fault really is it?" I asked. Denver cowered his head with an exhale. "I don't want to bicker with you right now." "Bicker?" I echoed. "Is that what this is? Your brother killed one of my people. Is there really any difference from what I insinuated before?" I scoffed out of my lips. "Make no mistake, Blake isn't one of us." "Well, what does it matter?" I shrugged. "You see, this is what I'm talking about. This back and forth with you." He arose from the porch, running his hands through the air. The night was chilly. I somehow managed to press my lips together, and there was a brief moment of silence between us. Here, he was the one to break it, and I looked at the ice in his hands. "You're bleeding from your head. You need this more than me," he said. I stubbornly scoffed. "I'm fine. If you had obeyed my instructions to simply stay still, this wouldn't have happened. So take this from my hand," he ordered in an authoritative tone. He cast a glare as cold as ice upon me, and I knew it wasn't a suggestion. I reached for the ice and pressed it into my swollen temples. "You could have said a simple thank you," I muttered. "For what?" "For jumping in to save your wife. Something I almost regret doing standing here now." Blake was about to slit your throat, and the only reason you got the upper hand was because of me. Did you hand me the stake I struck into his back? He sarcastically remarked, and I rolled my eyes again. You know what I'm talking about, I replied. A slight chuckle escaped his lips. Where did you even learn how to fight? Or whatever you thought you were doing? He asked, even though I could tell he was impressed by his eyes. The Eliana I knew 8 years ago could barely stick up for herself, he added. The ice had run thin, and I threw to the ground. Was that why it was so easy for you to walk all over me? I asked him, and his lips curved into a smirk. There was a pause. Good thing I'm not the Eliana you knew back then, I nodded. What changed? You can't tell? I threw the question back at him. Denver leaned against the side of the building with his arms folded. I'm really intrigued as to what you've been up to all this time. His hands slipped into his pocket, and I faced the direction of the winds. I trained as a warrior in a commune, I told him. By the chuckle he let out, he almost didn't believe. You, a warrior? He laughed. I faced him squarely. What's so funny? I asked. Huh? And in a split second, I maneuvered my way around him, holding his arms from behind. Denver used his super strength to flip my back to the ground before crawling between my legs. He pressed his body into mine, and it all happened so fast. Now, our faces were inches away from each other, and our heated, heavy breaths mingled in the air. I let my eyes fall to his lips, and then to his eyes, and he was distracted for a moment. A moment I used to my advantage before turning him over. My hips pressed into his torso as I held firmly around his neck. No cheating, I heaved. No super strength, because if he was human, I might as well have killed him at that moment. He knew that, which was why he clapped as he stood to his feet. You were saying? I muttered proudly beneath my breath as he smirked. You never ceased to surprise me, he said. That's because you always underestimated me, I replied. Can we just put all that behind us? He asked. I'm tired of you bringing up the past at every slight opportunity. Is that what you're saying about today? About Adam? I folded my arms. Or do you think I've forgotten? Look, I'm sorry for what my brother did. Denver inched closer, and the wind swayed through his hair. His moss-green eyes silvered in the moonlight, and I could see some genuineness in them. It didn't take away the fact that Adam was brutally and unfairly murdered, though. You're sorry? Does that magically make it okay? I questioned. I'll do anything to make it up to you, but you can't tell anyone about Adam, okay? His hands reached for mine as I gnashed my teeth together. As for Blake, I'll handle him, and I can assure you that it won't ever happen again. You know what's at stake, Eliana. You know why I'm asking this of you. History must never repeat itself. How are you sure it won't happen again? You said it yourself, Blake's back, I muttered. And I'll make sure he goes back to wherever he came from. There must be something that brought him here, and I'll make sure I find out what that is. Denver squeezed my hands assuringly. There's no place for that monster here in Oakland. It won't be hard to keep him away again, he added, and an arch came between my brows. There seemed to be so much history strained between the two brothers. No wonder he never mentioned him. But as far as my curiosity could go, I didn't ask him any more questions. There was just one last thing on my mind. So what are we going to do about Adam? I asked him, and he swallowed a hard lump down his throat. The only thing we can do. Eliana. The sirens blared loudly from a distance on this cold autumn morning on the outskirts of Oakland. The wind was in the withered trees and the streets were eerie. Why wouldn't it? News had only just spread that Adam's body had been found. I mounted the front porch with my arms folded across my chest. I let the breeze sweep through my hair as I swallowed a hard lump down my throat. Shifting my gaze, my eyes fell to my grandma. She was weeping, utterly broken at the news of Adam's passing. This was someone who'd stuck with her from the moment she was unlawfully banished from town. He'd sneak out to the cabin with leftover food and was even the first to have the nurses prescribe her some medications. Because let's face it, Nana was old. She was getting even frailer by the day. But the reason she even made it thus far was because of Adam. I understood her devastation, which made it even harder for me to contain the guilt that ate into my chest. He was devoured by an animal, they said. That much was true. But what wasn't was where his body was found. He was magically found on bloodhound grounds this morning, putting to rest any suspicion or accusation that had anything to do with Denver or his pack. I promised to keep this secret, because I knew it wasn't him who did it, and neither Black Mountain nor Bloodhound could handle a war right now. Denver had his brother to deal with, and we had a narcissistic, evil monster that was about to be alpha. Finding out the truth would do more bad than good. I soothed myself with that as I tore my eyes away from Nana. Suddenly, they grew moist at the surface of my eyelids. I can't believe it, there was a crack in her voice. I knew something was wrong when he didn't come back. Nana was distraught. He always came back. I never would have thought he was dead. I can't even, Nana, I called. It's okay. My eyes trailed up to Ivan, who smothered her back softly. They say it's an animal, but I don't believe it. He was always so careful, you know. God, she heaved a deep exhale. I never even told him goodbye, nor did I tell him a thank you. That boy's done so much good to me that I can't even put it together. Bile formed in my throat. Hearing her speak of him the way she did shattered my heart. Because Nana didn't really like a lot of people, but you could tell she really liked Adam. I didn't know him, but the one time we talked, it was obvious that he was a nice person. Unfortunately, bad things happen to nice people. And you're sure? What they're saying is correct. My grandma's hands frantically reached for mine, and I looked down at her. You're sure you didn't see him again that night? She asked. I had to clear my throat before lying to her face. I already told you, Nans. 1 second. He was there, and the next, he wasn't this time. I couldn't restrain the tears from falling down my face. I could handle a lot of things, but lying to my grandma would always get me. I'm so sorry, I whispered, watching the light leave her eyes. She faced the floor, and after a brief silence, she whispered, I don't believe it. My heart sank in my chest and an arch appeared between my brows. What? I don't think it was an animal. He would have been able to protect himself, she muttered. They say it's a mountain lion, Ivan added. Both our eyes met. I'm not sure he even believed that himself. We were trying to stop Grandma from worrying and hurting more than she already did. A bear or a mountain lion? I call bullshit. She lifted her eyes to me. And if there was one thing Nana was pretty good at, it was her conspiracy theories and her ability to always voice them out. This time, I feared, she might have been right. What? What do you think did this? I stuttered. Her eyes narrowed in on mine, and for a tense second, my heart raced. Then she said, Hunters. A sigh fled my lips as I unfolded my arms. Hunters? Ivan bore the same expression across his face as he echoed. They're back. I just know it. It's been so long, but they always come back, you know? And it starts out the same way. One of us mysteriously dies. They call it an animal attack. Then another dies. Still no suspicion. Then another. By the time we realize it, we've lost a score of us. And they're inching near an attack that could destroy us. Her eyes gleamed all-knowingly, and Ivan exhaled. You should get some rest. He withdrew his hands. I'm serious. I'm not crazy. Nans raised her voice, and when she looked up at me, I couldn't even say anything. She pressed her lips together with a light scoff. You see, Adam would never think I'm crazy, she muttered before storming back into the house. Ma, I called, but she didn't hesitate. I let out a deep breath from my lips, but as the door laid open, my eyes fell on Elijah in the room. Hey. I walked back in, leaning to cradle him close. His heart was beating fast and there was worry in his eyes. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" he asked softly. "Everything's fine," I sniffled forcefully. "But Grandma was crying and I can hear noises from outside," he argued. The sirens were far, but somehow they echoed even closer. "It's okay." I squeezed his hands with a smile. "It's okay. Go to your room, okay?" I nodded. "I promise I'll come up and meet you in a while." His eyelids flapped lazily, and he let go of my hands with a pout. "Okay," he whispered. I stood up, watching him climb up the stairs and into his room. Once the door closed, I clamped my lips with my hands, holding back even more tears that were about to stream down my cheeks. I filled my lungs with air, reminding myself that I had to be strong. "Not now," I mouthed, batting my lashes. "Not now." I closed the door and once again faced the breeze against my skin. "What do you think they're doing now?" A voice echoed from behind, and I turned back to face Ivan. We'd already seen them carrying what was left of his body, which only meant what was remaining was the funeral rites. It was much different for us, I realized, from the humans. Here, we lay the dead the same day their body is found. There are a ton of rites to be observed that would last the entire day, including a shifting ceremony and a remembrance feast that would later stretch into a vigil where the body is finally cremated, burned to ashes, and then laid to rest. "I can hear them," I clamored, leaning against the porch railing. "But I can't go, can I?" I swallowed a hard lump down my throat. "It's way too risky. Not when Jackson knows you're around," Ivan replied. "He's enjoying it, isn't he? Taking his time and keeping me on edge so he would strike when I least expect it. Is that his plan?" I scoffed. "I have no idea of that, but the alpha could really be unpredictable," Ivan replied. I physically had to stop my eyes from rolling all the way back. "He's not the alpha. Not when my father is still alive," I hissed angrily. "He already asked that we address him that way," Ivan explained, and after a brief pause, he took a step back. "Unless you want to plan on challenging him for that." He perched up a brow. "Oh, you are." He was almost surprised. "Barely," I replied. "You do know the cost, right?" Ivan asked. "I have to find myself a mate. Blah blah," I shrugged. "Find yourself?" he echoed. "That's the job of the moon goddess? Or have you no mate?" Ivan asked. I withheld the urge to retch at that moment. "Oh, I do." Ivan fell quiet, and when I looked back at him, his eyes were filled with intrigue. "Come on, I'd rather not," I hissed. "Or is it that guy that refuses to leave over there?" He darted his eyes far across the roads. And when I did, I was surprised to still find Denver parked in his car at a distance from us. Last night, he didn't leave. He promised to make sure Blake never returned, but I assumed he'd have gone by morning. I scoffed. But somehow, there he still was. "So, it is him," Ivan cooed in a sing-song voice. I wasn't having it, but then again, I didn't deny it. "Does he know?" he then asked, and I realized that was a question I never fully knew the answer to. "It doesn't matter because it's never going to happen." I shook it off. "What? You challenging Jackson for alpha or—" "Denver," I interrupted. "As for Jackson, I'm sure I'll find another way by the tone of my voice." It was clear I no longer wanted to talk about this, and thankfully, Ivan got the hint. He wasn't so pushy. He could make us a good friend, I thought. As I looked back at Denver, our eyes met. Ivan's phone started to ring as I excused myself. Sprinting down the porch, I made my way across the road, and as soon as I got to his beat-up Wrangler, I knocked on his windows. He first acted as if he hadn't seen me coming, and there was a facade of shock when our eyes met again. "Oh, it's I." "What are you doing here?" I interrupted, folding my arms across my chest. "Don't you think it's a bit too risky and reckless to show up, especially at this time? There's an ongoing funeral rite." Yes, that is far kilometers away, Denver persisted. Do you know what Jackson would do if he finds you here? I asked. I'm more concerned about what Jackson would do if he finds you here. And the reason I haven't left, believe it or not, is to make sure nothing terrible happens to you again, Denver continued. Since when do you care? I shrugged. Since my brother came back to town, he said. I can take care of myself. I already told you I trained as a warrior, he burst out laughing. This isn't some cult commune, this is Oakland. It's far worse. It's a place where your nightmares become reality. A cursed town that is a lot more worse with people like Blake and your stepbrother Jackson, he added. So no, I'm not leaving. At least, not for a while. I promise to make sure that not you or your people are harmed again. Now, Shui, he started to raise the windows of his car as soon as the howling of wolves started to draw closer. You standing here, now that's risky, he mouthed, and as I backed away, a light scoff escaped my lips. It took a while before he tore his gaze away from mine. Denver could lie all he wanted about why he was doing this, but somewhere deep down in his stoic exterior, I knew he cared. And it was just as surprising for me as it was for you. I made my way back to the porch, and I'd barely climbed the first step before Ivan called my name. Eliana. There was tension buried in his voice, and it was even scarier looking into his eyes. What is it? I started to panic. The call I just got, it was from one of the nurses at the PAC clinic who I'd given that substance to test for you. A hard lump swelled in my throat as I awaited his next words. Where did you get it from? His voice was low. Why? What happened to it? Is it bad? No, it's serpentoxin. It's not bad. It's dangerous. Capable of slowly killing a person in the most natural ways. Its effectiveness is the reason why it's banned in most places across the world, Ivan explained, and my jaw hung loose. I'd heard that name before. Serpentoxin. They're poisoning him. My hands clamped over my lips and a chill went up my spine. How did you get it, Eliana? He asked, and at that moment, a tear dropped from my eyes. Who did you get it from? My father. There was a crack in my voice. Jackson's been poisoning him this whole time, and Nora's been in on it. Maybe Sienna, too. It's the reason he's sick. My voice fell into a whisper, and Ivan backed away in shock. What the hell, he cussed, and I could feel my heart raging in my chest. Yeah, I paused. What the hell? Eliana. Eliana, wait. Ivan held out the door as I stormed inside angrily. My fist folded up, and my mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts. Eliana. It took him shouting much louder before I finally came to a halt, and with tears in my eyes, I threw a look back at him. What are you going to do now? His hands fell to his side, and I just shrugged. Anything but stay here while they're killing my father slowly. I can't believe this. I ran my hands through my hair as a tear dropped down my cheeks. Jackson must be stopped. I know that too, we all do. But we have to be wise about it. It has to be at the right time otherwise. There is no right time. I snapped. You didn't see my father the other day. I did. I added. And I'm not sure how much time he has left. I'm not sure how many doses they have to give him till it's over. But I'm not going to sit back and let it happen. I was about climbing the stairs when Nana wheeled herself out on a chair. Perhaps it was because of the noise, but her brows were arched across her forehead. What's going on? She asked, and I sniffled through my nose. Is this about Jackson? Ivan told me he already knows you're here. She continued, and my eyes met his. He stepped back for a moment. Eliana? She called. I heaved a sigh. He does. I ran into Nora at the party and she would have told him by now, but that isn't all. When I was there too, I saw her slip something into Dad's drink and I got the powder and had it tested. It's serpentoxin, Ma. I broke the news and she was taken aback. Serpentoxin, that's not. Nana fluttered her lashes, and I nodded with teeth into my lips. Oh, it is, I sniffled. All this time, only God knows for how long now they've been poisoning him. Dad's not sick. He's only like that because of Jackson. I know he was the one who ordered Nora to do it. And maybe Sienna is in on it too. Maybe it's their grand plan to finally clinch onto the throne and take over the pack, I said through my teeth. But I'm not going to let that happen. I walked up the stairs and into my room to brainstorm my next course of action against Jackson. But it was barely 5 minutes later when I heard the sound of gunshots outside the cabin windows, alongside the echoes of screeching brakes. I arose from my bed with my heart between my teeth. Throwing myself toward the window, I peeked behind the curtain and my eyes immediately fell on Nora and Jackson. I echoed, "What the fuck are they doing here?" My heart skipped once I heard the banging on the door and I crawled backward. Elijah, my son, was the first person that came to my mind. I knew Jackson's visit was imminent since the moonlight ball, but I didn't think he would actually show up today with an army of his betas too. The whole house was surrounded in a second while I scrambled inside in search of Elijah. And when I finally saw him, I grasped him by his shirt. The toy he was playing with fell out of his hands while he looked up at me with horror in his eyes. "What was that, Mom?" He was quivering, but I just reached for his teddy and shoved both of them inside the closet. "You have to stay here, Elijah, and don't make a sound." "Am I trouble, Mommy?" There was a crack in his frantic voice, and I pushed a hard lump down my throat before shaking my head. "Of course not." I forced those words out in a whisper. "Are you in trouble? Will you be back, Mommy?" His nails dug into my shoulder, and I fixed my eyes into his. "Mommy will be back, okay?" I assured him. "But you have to promise to listen to me. Not a single sound, and don't come out until I tell you to. Okay?" I ran my hands through his hair, bringing his forehead to graze against mine for a moment. And when Elijah nodded, I nodded too. Holding back the tears in my eyes, I pulled away and closed the door to the closet, sealing it with a chair. All this time, the banging against the door hadn't stopped. "Eliana," I heard my grandma's voice from behind. "They're here," I nodded, burying my quivering hands into my pocket. "Where's Elijah?" She grasped me backward and I looked at her. "He's safe," with yet another hard lump in my throat. I walked down the stairs just in time as Ivan finally opened the doors. And my heart sank in my chest the moment my eyes met my evil stepbrother's. A grimace curled his lips as he clapped his hands. He stepped into the house uninvited and with an aura that tied my stomach into a knot. "So it is true?" His voice was raspy and gritty. I lifted my gaze to Nora, who was right behind him, but she darted her eyes to the book in her hands. "Of course," she'd told him. I'd never seen anyone with as much loyalty as she had to her brother. Then all of a sudden, Sienna walked in too. She inched closer with her arms across her chest, and my Nana held me back. It was her. Ivan and I on one side, and Jackson, Nora, and Sienna, alongside his multitude of guards, my father's guards. He too. "But you don't poison your father, do you?" I couldn't even look into his eyes, not because of how violent they'd become, even more over the years. He wasn't as different from how I left him 6 years ago, but he wasn't exactly the same either. He was stronger, more powerful, with more authority than ever. He was a breath away from finally getting my father's throne and all the power over bloodhounds. With each step Jackson took forward, he exuded an aura of malevolence. His long, tangled hair cascaded down to his shoulders, black as a moonless night, and framing a face that bore so many scars. There was a stick in his hands, which he wedged against me. "You really are back," he finally continued. I would have never believed if it wasn't Nora. Hell, I even had my doubts at first. What exactly could bring Eliana Jacobs back to Oakland after so many years of being away? He hissed, and after a pause, shot a glare back at me. "It was a question. Answer me." His eyes glinted and a shiver went up my spine. How dare you come back? Or do you think I don't remember what I said 6 years ago? When you were on the cusp of running away, clearly without thinking it through, and I told you that if you walked out those doors, you must never step foot back here. Otherwise, what? Our eyes met, and my memories drifted regretfully to that night. I had to shut my eyes. Enough. My grandma came to my defense, and it was Sienna who inched closer to her. You're the one who's been harboring a traitor here, isn't it? She asked. That's my granddaughter you're talking about. Careful how you speak to me, Sienna ordered, almost lifting her hands to Nana, but I stopped her. Don't think for 1 second that because Gerald ordered you back from exile, I can't make you disappear again. This time, no one would even have a clue. You'd be dead for all they know. Finally. Leave her out of this, I said. Sienna looked at me. It's me you want, isn't it? It's me you came for, huh? Rather than seeing Adam's funeral rites through, you came here to threaten me? I seared through my teeth. How do you know about Adam? Jackson asked. I know everything that goes on here, and I know every one of our pack members. I'd be damned if you do. Damned if you cared about anyone or anything other than becoming alpha. So much that you'd do the most vile and unimaginable things to clench your way to the top. I narrowed my eyes, and Jackson echoed a cackle. There's some truth to that he looked to his mother, Sienna, who shrugged. I cringed. They both disgusted me. Is that why you're here? Why you came back? His lips finally pursed as realization set in. I know the grandma had something to do with this, his mother cooed. She's never wanted you to become alpha, she said. Jackson scoffed. Well, she hasn't succeeded all this time, has she? And I would be damned if she ever does. If anyone ever thinks that they could stop me from getting what I want, his eyes knowingly darted back to me, like he was speaking to my soul. That would be the biggest mistake of that person's life. I'll make sure of that. I wouldn't hesitate to kill. I'm not the Jackson you knew 6 years ago. I inched a step closer to him. Good, I muttered. Because I'm not the Eliana you knew 6 years ago. I couldn't even explain it. But there was this surge of courage inside of me as I uttered those words, and I could see the shock brazen in Jackson's eyes, even as he tried to play it off with a smirk. Don't test me, Eliana. He threatened, and a red glint flashed in his eyes, like he was making it obvious that his wolf wasn't so far away. I didn't back down nonetheless, even if my heart sank in that moment. Jackson was a lot stronger and more evil than he was 6 years ago. It would take an awful lot to defeat him. Or I'll finally do what I should have done back then. He gnashed his teeth together, and a sharp, tense breeze swept between us from the door. Which is kill you the door, it opened at that moment. And I drifted my eyes immediately because I knew exactly what that scent was. What's going on here? His voice, deep and decadent, thundered from the door, and a chill went up my spine as my eyes met his. Denver, I called faintly. What was he doing here? Denver? Jackson had to turn around to ascertain his doubts, and when he was faced with the alpha of Black Mountain, he drove a scoff out his lips. What are you doing here? I wouldn't lay a finger on her if I were you, Denver croaked. Walking inside the cabin, and for a moment, the air was thick with tension. You think you can just waltz into my pack and order me around? Jackson asked, and with each step Denver took closer to him. My heart sank deeper in my chest, because I couldn't tell what he was going to do. But then he came to a halt. It wasn't an order. He looked into Jackson's eyes squarely. It was merely a word of advice. Step away from her. So was that too. Denver flashed a malicious glint in his eyes before echoing a low growl to ascertain dominance between the two of them. You see, Jackson may have been strong, but he hasn't killed nearly as many people as Denver had. Everyone knew not to mess with him, including Jackson, which was why he did step away from me. although reluctantly, and then he cackled. "You'll regret this." He struck a finger at me. "Because I'll be back." Sienna walked to Nora and held her close. Jackson, on his way to the door, stopped next to Denver. "So will you. You of all people know it's best for both packs to stay in their own lane. You crossed a boundary today, Denver. Just so you know," that he muttered. And before he finally walked out with the rest of them, Jackson threw me one last threatening look. Then the door closed and I could finally breathe. Relief flashed across my face at that moment when Denver grasped my arm. "Are you okay?" Concern knitted his brows and filled his eyes. I had to let go, pretending my mind wasn't overcome with worry. Elijah, especially. I looked at the stairs before forcing out a lie from my lips. "I am," I said. "I'm okay." Eliana. Eliana, I'm calling you." "Where are you going?" When he reached for my arms, I turned back to face Denver. "Did you really have to come in?" I muttered under my breath. I had it all under control. Now Jackson would be wondering what exactly is going on between the two of us that you had to step in and save the day. I scoffed, detaching my wrist from his. "That's what you're worried about." His hands fell to his hips. "I already told you I can handle all of this by myself, all of what—" He interrupted. "Jackson," I raised my voice. I had it all under control. "Yeah." I clearly saw that Denver remarked sarcastically, and I narrowed my eyes at him. "Come on, Eliana. We're already past this." I said I was going to protect you, and when I saw him enter the house, "I stepped in to protect you," he replied, and a light scoff escaped my lips. "That's the thing, Denver." I paused. "I don't need you to protect me. 6 years I spent by myself, all alone. I was doing well protecting myself. Nothing is going to change this time. This isn't like the commune, Eliana." "You know that," he replied. "Then I'll figure it out, all on my own." I sealed my lips, and for a moment there was a brief pause. "I know why you're doing this," he said when I turned to walk away, and so I came to a halt. "I know why you're mad at me throwing my head over my shoulders." My eyes met his. "I was an asshole 6 years ago, that's one way to put it. Although it doesn't exactly do justice to you rejecting me, does it?" I raised a brow at him. "I'm not that man anymore," Denver added. "Great!" I exclaimed. "Because I'm not that woman anymore too," I said. "The woman who needed saving, that was so helpless and weak and easy for you to walk all over. The woman you looked in the eyes and rejected. I'm not that woman anymore, Denver." I shook my head. "You don't understand." It was complicated. His voice went low, and I chuckled softly. "Yeah, I understand complicated." It was so clear in my eyes that I was over his bullshit. I had been for some time now. "Guess it was quite easier for you to break me then." "I'm only making sure that doesn't happen again." "You don't owe me anything, Denver. The reason you're here is because of guilt. You and I both know." I whispered. "I treated you horribly, I know. I'll save you some, Denver. I'm no longer hurt by you. So there's really no need for you to be here. I was broken 6 years ago, but not anymore. Hell, there are some days that go by that I don't even think about it." "I think about it," he interrupted, and his voice reverberated my body. I felt my heart thump in my chest. "I've thought about it since the morning I woke up to find you gone." Denver inched closer to me. I, in turn, took a step back, but my body was wedged against the hard wall. "It isn't just guilt that drove me here. It's regret, too. Because I never should have let you go," he continued, gazing deeply into the soul of my eyes. Denver was meters away from my face, and his heated breaths lit my cheeks on fire. His hands slipped around me before I turned away. What was he doing? "You don't mean that?" I swallowed a hard lump down my throat. "I do. I do more than I even know myself. I didn't realize how much you meant to me until you were gone now. Those were words that could have crumbled my whole world to the ground back then. But they didn't mean so much now, I convinced myself. You have a really funny way of showing it, I replied, wriggling my way out of his grasp. I didn't make it so far apart, but I wasn't so close either. He set his eyes upon me, reluctant to take them off. What is it now? He heaved a sigh. I saw her that night. Claire, was it? I scoffed. After you gave me those divorce papers that night, I guess you couldn't wait to celebrate in her arms. I heard the both of you. Eliana, he called my name, but I shook my head. It's okay. I raised my arms in the air and my sleeves fell back. I shrugged it off. It's honestly okay, I added, and even with the smile across my lips, there was still a sting in the depths of my chest as I recollected that memory. But you know what's not okay, Denver? I asked him. He pressed his lips together in silence. You lying to me. Saying I meant something to you that's not okay, I whispered. He didn't say a word, not about that night at least. I need you to go. I walked towards the front door, but he didn't move. What happens when Jackson comes back again? He croaked. I'll figure it out, I replied dryly. You said you came back for your father and to stop Jackson from becoming alpha. I can help you do both, Denver said, and by the glint that sparked in his eyes, I knew what he was trying to say. No, without a doubt, I blurted out. Eliana, we could finally take him down. I turned to face the door, but he sharply grasped my arms back to him. I can help you if we're together, he persisted. Absolutely not, I yelled. How many times do I have to tell you that I don't need your help? It's the only way, Eliana. He pursed his lips with a wave of concern flashing across his face. You know it too. Or are you just going to let them keep poisoning your father? As soon as he said those words, my heart sank. How do you know about that? I looked over my shoulders before it hit me. Were you eavesdropping on my conversation with Ivan? I stared at him unbelievably. I saw how riled up you were from a distance, and I just wanted to. That's a new low, Denver. Even for you, I muttered. And this time, my hands pulled the door open. You really need to leave now. I pushed yet another hard lump down my throat. And there was a brief silence for a moment. Before there was a thud from upstairs and a little voice calling out, Mommy, Elijah. I batted my eyes at the ceiling and back to Denver, who had heard exactly the same thing. You need to leave. I pressed on even further. What was that? He was intrigued. Denver, I called his name. Are you not listening to me? Desperate to drift his attention away, I yelled at him. And it worked because he looked at me at that moment. I heard something, he said. Of course you heard something. My grandma is upstairs with Ivan. I wouldn't be surprised if they're still riled up about Jackson. It's been a really long day, and I need to leave now. Denver. He heaved a deep sigh. Finally grabbing his coat, he did halt for a moment. Would you at least think about what I said? He asked, and I folded my arms, still holding the door open for him. The winds grazed through my hair. You know there's one thing I don't understand. It's what you're gaining out of all of this. I arched my brows. And Denver stepped forward. You were wrong, Eliana. Because I do owe you something. 6 years ago, you agreed to an unbelievable deal to provide an heir for me. It doesn't matter now, does it? I mean, I wasn't able to. There was a crack in my voice as my heart lumped in my throat. Denver gazed relentlessly into my eyes. I'm sorry those words escaped his lips, and I wasn't sure he'd ever said it before. I was horrible to you all those years. Think of this as a way to redeem myself and make it up to you, Eliana. I want to help you, and you actually have a chance at taking Jackson down if we're together. We're a stronger force, mated, he muttered, and I scoffed. The thing is, Denver, you weren't just horrible to me. I finally looked him in the eyes, because this was something that came right from my heart. You rejected me as your mate. You made your decision, I said. And although sorries can take back a lot of things, I'm afraid there's no coming back from what you did, I whispered, ripping my eyes from him. So no, I'll pass on your offer of self-redemption. And I'll find another way to both take down Jackson and to help my pack, without you. By this time, he'd walked out onto my front porch, and I darted him one last look before closing the door in his face. I was sure he still stayed there for a few more seconds, even as I leaned against the door on the other side. For some reason, tears cramped up in my eyes and my heart stung in a way that it only did 6 years ago. I clutched my chest, and my words still hung in the air around me. Then he drew away, just that same moment that I saw Elijah. At the pinnacle of the stairs, I rushed to go meet him. I clamped a finger over his lips as I held him for a lasting hug. I didn't say a word until I was sure Denver was miles away. Then I pulled away to look into his teary eyes. Nana was right next to us with her arms folded. I was so scared, Mommy. There was a crack in his shrill voice and a tear dropped from my eyes. It's okay. It's over now, I whispered. Who were those people? My son asked. Bad people. Those were bad people. How I could ever tell him that those bad people were his family? Like the ones in my nightmares? He asked softly, and I nodded. But you said they weren't real, Mommy, Elijah asked, and my eyes darted to Nana. They weren't in Tuscany, but they are here. In Oakland. But you don't worry, Mommy wouldn't let anything bad happen to you, I continued. I'll protect you until my dying breath. I'll make sure of that. And who will protect you? Elijah lifted his eyes to me, and my heart sank at those words. I thought you said Daddy would be here, he said. My lips fell apart at that moment as I sat on the ground. Elijah crawled into my arms with innocence rooted in his eyes, and the next words he said were bound to leave a lasting effect on me. We can ask him, Mommy, he paused. Daddy will protect you. Eliana. This is a serum Ivan stretched out of his hand, and in it was a plastic amber bottle. An arch came between my eyes which fell to him. I might have used the lab back in the pack to create some sort of antidote for your father, he added. I couldn't whether to be relieved just yet. Now, it's not a total cure. Unless somehow we're able to stop them from poisoning him, that's our greatest chance. But this, he handed it over to me, clenching my palms right after. This could slow down the progression of the poison in your father's system. And it could buy us some time until we come up with a plan, he continued. Ivan, my eyes narrowed thankfully. I did say we were going to figure something out, didn't I? He shrugged. Thank you, I muttered. I had no idea he was even working on something, but it was about time for some good news around here. My gaze fell on the serum as I held tighter around it. Your father, Ivan paused. I'm doing this for him too. He may not have shown it in the best ways, but he loved this pack. Everything he did was in our own best interests, he said. And I pressed my lips together. My eyes darted to the floor. I wish he loved me too, I said, but only in my mind. I couldn't dare it say aloud, but sometimes I felt if I at least had my father's love growing up, things would have turned out differently. For one, he wouldn't have married Celine, and there would have been no Jackson. I wouldn't have had to endure hell growing up. More so now, too. I can see you love him too. Ivan's voice swelled in my ears as I drew my eyes to look up at him. What? I blurted out. I mean, you came back. After everything that happened and all this time, you still came back to help him. To help us. Your grandmother wasn't so sure at some point. She was the only one who could reach you regardless, but she didn't think you'd actually come. I scoffed with a lump forming in my throat. Of course I came. It wasn't even up for debate. They are my family, these people. Even if I wasn't theirs, they've always been mine still. My mother was such a loving person from the stories I'd heard. Sometimes I think that's why I'm the way I am too. To a fault, though. She was one of the reasons I came back too. I could feel her around here. She was right here, not in Tuscany. Right here. Not a lot of people would have, though. Ivan purses his lips and mine lined in a half smile. I guess I wasn't like a lot of people. Our eyes shifted once the door opened to my grandma. "I've finally been able to put him to sleep," she announced, wheeling herself into the room, and my shoulders went flat. "Oh, Elijah," I whispered. "Could you blame him? The last few days have been especially rough for him," Nana said. And it couldn't have hurt my heart anymore that I was the reason he was in such terror. Ever since that day Jackson came by, he's been convinced of even more monsters coming to the cabin. I'd assured him more than 1,000,000 times that I wouldn't ever let that happen. But he never stopped asking for his father. Only then, he was convinced, would he feel truly safe. As for Denver, even if he stayed his distance, which was only just a few meters from the driveway, I still saw him every time I went out. To take out the trash, he'd be right there, parked in his truck and watching over the cabin. He wouldn't ever take no for an answer. That much was clear, so I just stopped asking him. He was hell-bent on keeping his brother and Jackson away from here. He was actually protecting us. Only if I could tell Elijah that the man outside our window was his father. But I couldn't. "What's that?" My grandmother's eyes soon met the bottle in my hands. "It's a serum we're meant to give my dad. Ivan made it, and it might be able to slow down the poison from affecting him so much. And buy us some time," I replied. "Exactly the opposite of what Jackson wants," she said, and I nodded. I knew he wanted to become alpha. And he wanted to become alpha fast. Everyone knew. It would only take a while for his patience to truly run thin. "And how will you be able to give your dad the serum?" Nana asked. Well, it was Ivan who chirped in. "There's a parade at midnight." I looked at him. Jackson is meant to officially introduce the bride he's chosen from the Moonlight Ball to the members of the pack, especially the elders. "It's park rights," Ivan continued. "A parade?" I echoed. "Yes, we could do exactly what we did the last time and sneak into your father's chamber." "Only one dose could last him a week," he replied. "And what if he's not alone like the last time?" I questioned. "Oh, he will be," Ivan was so certain. "He's never at these things. Hell, he doesn't even know his son is already preparing to take over after his death. All he knows is all he's heard. Jackson made sure to threaten everyone to stay away from your father," he added. "All he ever does is stay in that room, never comes out. So the only people that get to see him are Jackson, Nora, and Sienna." "What if you're not able to get in this time?" Nana asked worriedly. "That's why it must be tonight. At least none of them would be near the chamber. As for the guards, you could easily find a way around them like the last time," Ivan muttered, and a glimmer of doubt ignited in my eyes. "The last time," I echoed. "The last time someone died." "I don't think it's safe," Nana refuted. "You can't send her all by herself into the lion's den. Not when he knows now that she's around," she said. "I can't go along too. I have to be there at the parade. He's already noting the unusually long hours I spend down here. I think it's really risky because he can always replace me at any time. If even he finds out about this serum, I'd have a sword in my chest by midnight," Ivan continued. "But you simply can't go alone. It's dangerous." Nana persisted, and in the dawn of a brief silence, Ivan walked to the windowsill and looked out. "No," I blurted from my lips. "He can follow you," he still suggested nonetheless. "Hell, he will even be happy to," he added. "No," I turned to my grandma, who nodded. It was clear she was on his side. "He wants to protect you, so allow him to do that," she uttered. "You don't understand," I scoffed. "I understand that you both have a rough history, but that was 6 years ago, Eliana. Don't you think it's time to not even just move on, but to at least face the bigger problem? Nana spilled and I bit into my lips. He's going with you, and that's final. She still found a way to stamp her feet, even with the wheelchair, and a groan escaped my lips as I walked up the stairs. Fine, I grudgingly agreed, already dreading the next few hours. I made my way into my room. It was almost 10 p.m., which meant we didn't have that much time anymore. So I slipped into some pants and wore on a lavender top. On second look, it was a bright color for someone who's supposed to be invisible. So I went with a black leather jacket too. Slipping my hands through the long sleeves, I made my way down the stairs. Stay safe, Nana chuckled as I hissed. Ivan was already gone by then, but unfortunately, Denver wasn't. As soon as I opened my front door, there he was, still parked across the roads. Please, goddess, give me patience tonight, I muttered beneath my breath as I crossed over to his car. I pulled my hands out from my pocket and knocked against his window. I could hear him blasting an 80s rock song before he even pulled it down. And he didn't hide the surprise in his eyes. Open up? I clutched the handle of his door and he scoffed in disbelief. Well, those are words I never thought I'd hear, he remarked sarcastically. And it took a lot of self-control to not roll my eyes to the back of my head at that moment. Don't be gross, the locks clicked. I opened the door and stepped into his car. I told you to leave, but you don't, which is fine now. Because you're going with me to my pack for the parade. The what? I could barely hear him over the loud banging music, so I just turned it off. Please, enough with the god-awful music, the parade, I replied to him, also reaching across to start the car engines with the keys. He looked back and forth with a stick between his lips. I have no idea what's going on, but it's hot seeing you all bossy. He kicked the car into gear and with his arm over my head, he reversed out of the driveway. Again, I scrunched my whole face at him. Don't be gross. You know we were married once. Surely there's regrettably, I turned up the volume of the radio. It was playing a song that physically made me almost slice my ears, but it wasn't nearly as bad as hearing Denver. He turned to me with a smirk across his lips, and I tore my eyes off him to look out the car windows. God, it was going to be a very long night.